Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was reborn in Spy X family and fell in love with Yor and Fiona Frost? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Ghost of Berlin. The steam that rose from the vat of simmering pork bone broth was a ghost of its own, clinging to the cool evening air before vanishing into the Berlin night. It carried the scent of roasted garlic, charred scallions, and a dozen other secrets that Naruto kept to himself. This small, unassuming ramen stand, wedged between a weary-looking tailor shop and a bookstore that smelled of decaying paper, was his sanctuary. Naruto's Ichiraku, the sign read in jaunty Austanian script, a small, hand-carved wooden plaque that was the only piece of his past he had allowed to follow him into this new life. Here, he was just Naruto, the quiet, blonde proprietor with faint, whisker-like marks on his cheeks that patrons assumed were peculiar scars. He was the man who never seemed to fluster, who remembered every regular's order, and whose ramen was rumored to cure everything from a common cold to a broken heart. He moved with an economy of motion honed not by culinary school, but by A.T. house and battles on a world of gods and monsters. The rhythmic thwack of his knife dicing green onions, the precise ladle of broth into a waiting bowl, the gentle placement of a soft-boiled egg, it was a meditation. A liturgy of normalcy that kept the echoes of the past at bay. Tonight, the stand was quiet, the usual dinner rush having ebbed into a trickle of late-night stragglers. A low-level Berea, UCRAT from the Ministry of Culture slurped his noodles with noisy appreciation. A pair of university students argued passionately about political philosophy over their bowls of miso ramen. Naruto watched them all, his sapphire blue eyes missing nothing, his senses extending beyond the simple sights and sounds of the street. He could feel the thrum of the city around him, a tapestry of life forces, some bright, some dim, some frayed with anxiety. It was a duller sensation than the vibrant chakra he had once known, but it was there, a constant hum beneath the surface of reality. Then, the hum shifted. A new presence approached. Two of them. One was a beacon of frazzled, anxious energy, a firefly flitting in a hurricane of its own making. The other was a void. A perfectly still, deep pool of water that concealed a leviathan. It was an energy signature so tightly controlled, so ruthlessly suppressed, that its very stillness was more alarming than any overt display of power. The flap of his stand was pushed aside, and a woman with startlingly beautiful black hair stepped in, a small child with pink hair held by the hand. "Good evening," the woman said, her voice a soft, slightly hesitant melody. "Is it too late for a table? Or, well, a stool?" Naruto's gaze flickered from the woman to the child. The child, Anya, was staring at him with wide green eyes, her small mouth slightly agape. She was the firefly. The woman, Yor, was the void. He had seen them before. They came in once a week, always ordering the same thing. Shio ramen for the mother, a half bowl for the daughter, extra Narutomaki fish cakes for both. He felt a faint, inquisitive tendril of thought brush against the outer layers of his mind. It was clumsy, untrained, like a child's finger poking at a tidal wave. He didn't read the thought. He couldn't. That wasn't his ability, but he felt the probe itself. Anya, the little girl, was a telepath. Anya, for her part, was drowning. When she read minds, she usually got a jumble of words. Worries about bills, thoughts about dinner, fleeting images. When she looked at the ramen man, her power plunged into an ocean. It wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet, a vast, silent expanse of blue that stretched into an infinite horizon. Down in the depths, something enormous and ancient slept, a beast of pure, molten energy that radiated a feeling not of malice, but of immense, world-shattering power and a deep, bone-weary sadness. And on the surface of that ocean, ghosts of memory drifted like fog. A name, Kurama, whispered with an aching fondness. Another, Sasuke, tinged with the bitterness of 1,000 arguments and the strength of an unbreakable bond. A whole village, green and vibrant, hidden amongst the leaves. The feeling that washed over her was of loss. A loss so profound it had carved out the floor of the ocean itself. It was too much. She stumbled back a step, her hand tightening in her mother's. "Anya, what's wrong, sweetie?" Yor asked, her brow furrowing with concern. Her attention snapped entirely to her daughter, the placid void of her energy signature rippling with protective instinct. Naru's lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. He leaned forward, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't say anything to betray her secret. He simply reached under the counter, pulled out a pink swirled fish cake, and offered it to her. "On the house," he said, his voice warm and low. "For my best customer." Anya stared at the fish cake, then back at his face. The overwhelming ocean in her mind receded, shielded by a gentle, deliberate calm. He was hiding it from her, protecting her from it. She took the fish cake with a shaky hand and mumbled, "Thanks." Yor beamed, her maternal pride overriding her confusion. "Oh, that is so thoughtful of you. Thank you so much. We'll have our usual, please." "Coming right up," Naru said, turning back to the noodles. As he worked, he listened to their conversation. Yor tried to get Anya to talk about her day at Eden College. A series of gentle, slightly clumsy questions that Anya answered with distracted, one-word replies. The girl kept sneaking glances at him, her mind still buzzing with what she had felt. Naru understood. He had been an anomaly in his own world. It was only natural he would be one here, too. He had learned long ago that true power wasn't in the shouting, but in the silence. In the control. In the ability to live a life like this, serving noodles to a city hall clerk who was also, unknowingly, a deadly assassin, and her telepathic daughter. He placed the 2 bowls of ramen on the counter. The broth was clear and fragrant, the noodles perfectly wavy, the chashu pork so tender it threatened to dissolve. He had added 3 extra fish cakes to Anya's bowl. Her eyes went wide. "Waku waku," she whispered, a genuine smile finally breaking through her shock. Yor looked at him with sincere gratitude. "You're too kind. Really. It's nothing," Naru said. "A growing girl needs her fish cakes." He felt a familiar presence approach from the street. It was Minister Hoffman, a high-ranking official in the Ostanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A portly man with a perpetually worried expression. Hoffman was a regular, but he never came this late. His life force was afraid not of pure panic. Hoffman slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, away from the other patrons. He ordered his usual tonkatsu, but his eyes darted around nervously. Naru simply nodded and began preparing the bowl. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. The man's terror was a stench in the air, sharper than the pickled ginger. While Yor and Anya ate, happily oblivious, Hoffman waited. Naru delivered his ramen, setting it down with a quiet thud. As the minister reached for his chopsticks, his hand brushed against Naru's, and a small, folded photograph was pressed into his palm. Naru's fingers closed around it without a change in his expression. "They want to stop the summit," Hoffman whispered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely audible over the sound of the bureaucrats slurping. "The Westalis talks, a splinter faction of the National Unity Party. They took her from her music lesson." His voice broke. "They said if the preliminary talks aren't cancelled by dawn, they'll..." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Naru slid the photograph into his pocket. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, lost their placid warmth. They became chips of ice, cold and hard and ancient. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had tried to leave this behind. This world of violence and rescue, but it had a way of finding him. He had built this quiet life, and he would protect it. And sometimes, protecting his own peace meant venturing back into the storm. "Eat your ramen, Minister," Naru said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the man's sea of panic. "Go home. Be with your wife. Don't answer any calls. I'll handle it." Hoffman looked up, his eyes filled with desperate hope. He saw no bravado in Naru's face, no boasting. Just an unshakable, terrifying certainty. It was the certainty of a man who had made promises like this before and had always kept them. The minister nodded, tears welling in his eyes, and finally picked up his spoon. Across the counter, Yor finished her last bite. "That was delicious, as always. We should get going, Anya. It's past your bedtime." Anya, clutching a drawing she'd been working on, nodded. She slid off her stool and walked up to Naru, holding the paper out. It was a crayon drawing of him. A stick figure with wild yellow hair, standing behind his ramen counter. He was smiling. "For you," she said. Naru took the drawing, his expression softening once more. "I'll hang it up." As they left, Yor gave him one last, warm smile. A simple, human smile from a woman who could likely kill a man with a dinner fork. A woman who had no idea the quiet ramen chef she admired was about to walk into the same fire she so often danced in. He watched them disappear down the street, then turned and began to clean his station. The bureaucrat left. The students followed. Soon, the only one left was Hoffman, who was forcing down his noodles through choked sobs. Once the minister was gone, Naru finished wiping down the counter. He flipped the sign to closed, doused the lights, and stood for a.m. moment in the dimness of his small kitchen. He pulled the photograph from his pocket. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, with her father's kind eyes and a bright, toothy grin. Alara Hoffman. He let out a slow breath. The quiet ramen chef persona dissolved, replaced by something older, sharper. His posture straightened. The weariness in his eyes was replaced by a focused, predatory gleam. The ghost of Berlin was about to go for a walk. The rain began as a drizzle, then thickened into a steady downpour, washing the grimy streets of Berlin's industrial district. It slicked the cobblestones and sent plumes of steam rising from manhole covers. To Naru, it was a cloak. The sound of the rain masked footsteps, the darkness swallowed shadows, and the water washed away scents and tracks. He moved not like a man walking, but like a current of air flowing through the urban landscape. He wore simple, dark clothes, a black turtleneck, dark trousers, and soft-soled boots that made no sound. He had no gadgets, no weapons strapped to his body. He didn't need them. He was the weapon. His destination was a derelict textile warehouse on the eastern fringe of the city, a place the SSS wouldn't patrol. And the regular police had long since ridden off. Hoffman's whispered intel had been sparse, but it was enough. Standing across the street, shielded by the perpetual gloom of a defunct factory, Naru closed his eyes. He didn't look at the warehouse, he felt it. He expanded his senses, the world dissolving into a map of life signatures. He counted them. 12 on the ground floor, arranged in patrol patterns. 4 more on the second floor, more stationary, likely guarding something. Or someone. And 1 small, flickering life force on the third floor, huddled in a corner, radiating pure terror. Alara. He felt their intent. It was a sour, angry energy. A mix of fanatical belief, greed, and a low-grade fear of getting caught. They were amateurs playing at being soldiers, which made them unpredictable, and therefore dangerous. He took a deep breath, and then he suppressed his own presence. For anyone watching, he would have simply vanished from the spot where he stood. For his own senses, he was like pulling a blanket of pure nothingness over his life force. He became a hole in the fabric of the world, a ghost in truth as well as in name. The perimeter was lazy. 2 men sharing a cigarette under a leaking awning, complaining about the rain and their leader. Naru flowed past them, a ripple in the downpour. He found a drainage pipe, slick with rain and algae, leading up to a second-story window. He scaled it with the silent, fluid grace of a spider, his fingers and feet finding purchase where there should be none. The window was latched, a minor inconvenience, a precise, controlled pulse of his residual chakra. Barely a spark, vibrated the latch mechanism. It clicked open without a sound. He slipped inside, into a large, cavernous room filled with rusted looms and shrouded machinery. Below him, he could hear the guards' boots on the concrete floor. He moved through the shadows overhead, his feet silent on the steel crossbeams. He was a phantom drifting through the warehouse's metal skeleton. The 4 guards on this floor were in a makeshift break room, playing cards around a crate. He could smell the stale coffee and cheap tobacco. He dropped from the rafters behind the first man, one hand cupping his mouth to stifle any sound, the other striking the precise bundle of nerves at the base of his skull. The man went limp without a twitch. The card player across from him looked up, his eyes widening in confusion as his partner slumped forward onto the table. "Hey, Klaus, you." He never finished the sentence. Naru was already there, a blur of motion too fast for the man's brain to process. A sharp, chopping blow to the side of the neck. A second man down. The remaining 2 were scrambling for their rifles, their panic a frantic spike in the air. One of them managed to swing his weapon around, but he was aiming at empty space. Naru was already behind him. A swift kick swept the man's legs out from under him, and his head met the concrete floor with a sickening crack. The last guard stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror, staring at the spot where his 3 comrades had been felled in less than 5 seconds. He opened his mouth to scream. The scream never came. Naru's hand clamped over his face, and a thumb pressed hard into a pressure point below his ear. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. 4 down. Not a single shot fired. Not a single alarm raised. He ascended to the 3rd floor. The door to the office was thick steel. 2 guards stood outside, rifles held at a lazy port. Naru approached from the darkened end of the hall, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the drumming rain. The guard on the left shivered, rubbing his arms. "You feel that?" he whispered. "A draft. It's an old building," his partner grumbled. "Shut up and watch the door." That was the last thing he ever said. Naru emerged from the shadows between them. His hands shot out, grabbing both men by the back of their heads and knocking their foreheads together with a sharp, percussive thump. They crumpled to the floor in a heap. He tried the door. Locked. He placed his palm flat against the cold steel, focusing. He could feel the tumblers inside the lock mechanism. With another minuscule, controlled pulse of chakra, he manipulated them directly, coaxing them into alignment. The lock clicked open with a soft snick. Inside, the room was sparse. A desk, a chair, and in the corner, a small figure huddled under a thin blanket. Alara Hoffman. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear as he entered. She was about to scream. Naru raised a hand, his expression softening from a predator's focus to a gentle calm. "It's okay," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Your father sent me. I'm here to take you home." The girl stared at him, at his strange Isker marks in his impossibly calm blue eyes. He exuded an aura not of threat, but of absolute safety. He was the safest thing she had ever felt in her life. The terror that had been strangling her for hours finally receded. She nodded, tears silently tracing paths down her dirty cheeks. He glanced at the desk. A phone, a stack of papers outlining their demands, and a pistol. The leader of this sad little revolution was downstairs, probably giving a speech to his remaining men about the glories of a pure Ostania. Naru picked up a pen and a scrap of paper. He thought for a moment, then wrote a simple message. He placed it on top of the pistol, then turned back to Alara. "Can you walk?" She nodded again. "Good. Stay right behind me. Don't make a sound." He led her out of the room, stepping over the unconscious guards. He guided her back the way he came, down through the silent, corpse-strewn 2nd floor, and out the same window he'd entered. The descent was trickier with her, but he made it seem effortless. Supporting her weight as they moved down the slick drainage pipe. Once on the ground, he pulled a burner phone from his pocket, a relic from a previous job, and sent a simple, Onyo. Nimbus text to the Berlin Police Department, disturbance. 14 Rothberg Lane, industrial sector. He then turned to the girl. "There's a cafe 2 blocks that way," he said, pointing. "The police will be there soon. Tell them who you are. They'll take you to your father." She looked up at him, her small hand still clutching the back of his coat. Who are you?" Naru offered her a small, sad smile. "Just a friend of your dad's." He gave her a gentle nudge. "Go on now. Be brave." She hesitated, then ran, her small form quickly swallowed by the rain and darkness. He waited until he could no longer feel her life signature. Then he turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving behind a warehouse full of broken men and a single, cryptic note. Your forger moved with a grace that belied her mission. To the world, she was a demure clerk at Berlin City Hall, a loving wife, and a doting mother. But now, in the rain-swept darkness, clad in her black dress and with her golden, stiletto-like weapons held ready, she was the Thorn Princess, an instrument of the garden, a shadowy organization of assassins who pruned the pests threatening their nation's fragile peace. Her target tonight was Kurt Richter, fanatical leader of a National Unity Party splinter cell. The intel said he and his men were holed up in a disused textile warehouse, holding the daughter of a key diplomat hostage to derail the Westalis peace talks. The order from the shopkeeper was simple: eliminate Richter and any of his men who posed a threat. The girl was to be left for the authorities. The professional in her was focused, her senses on high alert. The mother in her was worried for the child. It made her movements sharper, her intent more lethal. She arrived at the warehouse a little over an hour after Naru had left. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It was wrong. A building with over a dozen armed fanatics should have a buzz of activity, even in the dead of night. This place was as quiet as a crypt. Her instincts, honed by years of killing, screamed at her. Trap. She circled the building, her heels making no sound on the wet pavement. She found the two guards under the awning. They weren't just unconscious. They looked folded, as if they had been crumpled like paper. Their limbs were bent at unnatural angles, but there was no blood. Her brow furrowed. This wasn't the work of the SSS. Their methods were brutal but messier. This was clean, too clean. She entered the warehouse through a side door, its lock broken. The scene inside stopped her cold. Bodies, or, more accurately, incapacitated men, scattered across the ground floor like discarded toys. Some were groaning, some were out cold. A few were clearly dead, their necks snapped with brutal efficiency. But again, very little blood. It looked like a brawl had taken place, but also as if one side had been a force of nature. She moved upstairs, her golden weapons held tight. The second floor was the same. 4 men, piled in a heap. Their card game scattered around them. They were all breathing, but they wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. The precision of it was chilling. Each one was taken down with a single, disabling blow. It was the work of a master martial artist, someone whose physical abilities bordered on the absurd. Finally, she reached the 3rd floor. 2 more guards lay unconscious in the hall. The door to the office stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open, her weapons ready for the final confrontation. The office was empty, save for a cheap desk and chair. The hostage was gone. The target was gone. The only thing in the room was a pistol on the desk, and a piece of paper lying on top of it. She approached cautiously, her eyes scanning every corner. No hidden threats. She picked up the note. The handwriting was simple, clean. It contained only 5 words. He's not worth the blood. Yor stared at the message. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the rain ran down her spine. Her mission was to assassinate Kurt Richter. This note implied that whoever had been here had made a judgment call. They had neutralized the entire operation, rescued the hostage, and simply left the leader. They had deemed him unworthy of being killed. It was a professional insult of the highest order. But more than that, it was a statement of power. This wasn't an agency. This wasn't a team. The evidence, our speed and efficiency required to do all this, pointed to a single individual. One person, a ghost who moved through the city, dispensing their own form of justice. A predator who operated on a level she had never encountered before. The Thorn Princess, for the first time in a long time, felt like she wasn't the most dangerous thing in the shadows. The thought was both infuriating and, to a small, hidden part of her, thrilling. In a sterile, soundproofed room deep beneath the Wise Westalian sector headquarters, the scent of antiseptic and strong coffee hung in the air. Agent Twilight, known to the world as Lloyd Forger, stood before a large map of Berlin, his expression a mask of intense concentration. Across from him, his handler, Sylvia Sherwood, took a long drag from her cigarette, the smoke curling around her severe features. "Report," she said, her voice flat. "The Hoffman girl is safe," Lloyd stated, tapping a location in the industrial district. The Berlin PD picked her up 2 blocks from the warehouse. "She's been returned to her father. The summit talks are secure. And the extremists, in custody. Most of them." The BPD, acting on an anonymous tip, raided the warehouse. They found 12 men, all suffering from what the medical report calls severe blunt force trauma. 4 more on the 2nd floor, another 2 on the 3rd. All non-lethal, except for 3 who appeared to have died from high-impact collisions with concrete surfaces. The leader, Kurt Richter, was found wandering a block away in a state of shock, babbling about a demon in the rain. Sylvia exhaled a plume of smoke. And the official story, rival faction infighting. It's flimsy, but the SSS is running with it to save face. They can't admit a group of their own nationalist fanatics were neutralized by an unknown party. Lloyd's gloved finger traced a circle around the warehouse location. But that's not what happened. Our audio surveillance in the area picked up nothing. No gunshots, no explosions. The entire cell, 17 armed men, was dismantled in complete silence in under 30 minutes. Hostage extracted, target left alive, perpetrators incapacitated. He looked at Sylvia, his sharp eyes troubled. This doesn't fit any known operational profile. Not the SSS, they're too brutish. Not the Garden, their work is lethally surgical and focused on assassination. It's not any of our own assets. This is an unknown variable. A third party operating in Berlin with an incredible level of skill. Sylvia crushed her cigarette in an ashtray. We're calling him the Ghost of Berlin. This is the third incident in 2 months. A smuggling ring dealing in state secrets, vanished. A human trafficking operation, dismantled overnight, the ringleaders left tied up for the police. Now this. He's disrupting the board, and I don't like playing games with pieces I don't control. He's acting as a vigilante, Lloyd mused. But his capabilities are state level, or beyond, which makes him a threat to Operation Strix. A threat to the entire balance of this city, Sylvia said, her voice turning to steel. You are too valuable, too embedded to risk investigating this directly, Twilight. If this ghost is as good as he seems, he'd spot you a mile away. We need someone else, someone with the skills to hunt a ghost. She pressed a button on her intercom. Send her in. The door opened, and a woman with stark white hair and an expression of cold, unwavering intensity stepped into the room. Agent Fiona Frost, codename Nightfall. Her movements were precise, her gaze unwavering. She looked at Lloyd with an emotion that was just a fraction too warm to be purely professional, then her face settled back into its default stone mask as she faced Sylvia. Handler, she said, her voice devoid of inflection. Nightfall, Sylvia acknowledged. We have a new assignment for you. An unregistered operative of unknown origin is active in Berlin. He is highly skilled, physically powerful, and operates with complete stealth. He is a threat to the mission. Fiona's eyes flickered with something that might have been interest. A challenge. Your objective, Sylvia continued, is to identify and profile this ghost. Learn his methods, his motives, his capabilities, and if possible, his identity. You are to observe only. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. He is a complete unknown. And we need to know if he is a potential asset or a target for neutralization. Fiona gave a curt, sharp nod. My starting point. Sylvia slid a single file across the table. The ghost's only patter is that he cleans up messes that official channels can't, or won't. Minister Hoffman, the father of tonight's hostage, is a known creature of habit. In times of stress, he has one comfort. She paused for effect. A small, late-night ramen stand in the city center. Naruto's Ichiraku. The minister was there tonight, just before the raid. That is your first thread. Pull on it. Fiona took the file, her gaze fixed and determined. She was the Hound, Wise's best tracker and field agent. There was no one she couldn't hunt, no secret she couldn't uncover. Understood, she said, her voice a promise. I'll find your ghost. She turned and left the room as silently as she had entered, leaving Lloyd and Sylvia in the quiet hum of the command center. Lloyd stared at the map, a sense of deep unease settling over him. An unknown player of this caliber was a nightmare. A ghost who could move through the city, right under his nose, and bend the course of events with his own 2 hands. And that ghost's story, it seemed, began in a simple ramen stand. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Hound and the Thorn Princess. Fiona Frost operated on a plane of pure, cold logic. Emotion was a variable to be controlled, a weakness to be exploited in others and ruthlessly suppressed in oneself. Her world was one of data points, observable tells, and predictable human behavior. Her target, the Ghost of Berlin, was an anomaly. A chaotic variable that offended her professional sensibilities. The ramen stand, Naruto's Ichiraku, was the first data point. For 3 consecutive days, she observed. The first day, she was a mousy university student. Her pristine white hair hidden under a drab brown wig, a pair of thick glasses perched on her nose. She sat in the bookstore across the street, pretending to read a dense volume on Estonian agricultural policy while her eyes never left the stand's entrance. She watched the target, Naru. He moved with a disquieting efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no hurried stress even during the lunch rush. Every chop, every pour, every wipe of the counter was executed with a placid, almost meditative grace that was at odds with the frantic energy of a food service job. His smile was warm, his interactions with customers genuine, but his eyes held a stillness that she had only ever seen in veteran soldiers staring into the middle distance. He was present, but part of him was somewhere else entirely, a million miles or 1,000 years away. The second day, she was a businesswoman on a hurried lunch break, her hair now a severe black bob, her suit impeccably tailored. She sat at the counter itself, ordering a bowl of shoyu ramen. The noodles were perfect. The broth was a complex, savory miracle. It was, objectively, the best ramen she had ever tasted. It annoyed her. While she ate, she analyzed him up close. No visible weapons. No obvious physical tells of a trained combatant beyond a lean, powerful build that his simple chef's uniform couldn't quite conceal. His hands were calloused, but not in the way of a cook. The wear was older, deeper. Scars, thin and white like faded lightning, crisscrossed his forearms, vanishing under his sleeves. Then he looked at her. It was just for a second, a casual glance, but his blue eyes seemed to look right through her disguise, through the persona, and into the cold, calculating agent beneath. He smiled faintly. "Long day at the office?" he asked, his voice calm. "Something like that," Fiona replied, her own voice a carefully constructed monotone. "You look like you need it," he said, and before she could object, he placed a small dish of extra spicy pickled bamboo shoots beside her bowl. "Helps wake you up." She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't given any indication she was tired. But the sharp, fiery taste did, in fact, cut through the mental fog of her round-the-clock surveillance. It was a guess. It had to be a guess. But it was a perfect one. She finished her meal, paid, and left. The feeling of being analyzed unsettling her more than she cared to admit. On the third night, she decided passive observation was no longer sufficient. He was a creature of habit. He closed his stand at 10, cleaned for an hour, and then left. She would follow. Dressed in dark, practical clothing that blended into the city's shadows, Fiona took up a position on a rooftop half a block away. At 11:15, as predicted, he emerged. Locking the stand's wooden door, he stretched, a simple, cat-like motion that hinted at a deep well of coiled power, and then started walking, not toward any of the nearby residential districts, but toward the bustling heart of the city's transit system. The chase was on. Or, it was supposed to be. Tailing a target was an art form Fiona had perfected. She was a ghost in her own right, using crowds, architecture, and the natural rhythm of the city to remain unseen. But Naru was different. He didn't check over his shoulder. He didn't alter his pace or take suspicious detours. He just walked. And yet, she constantly felt on the verge of losing him. He'd turn a corner, and for the 2 seconds it took her to follow, he'd be a full block further ahead than he should have been. His leisurely pace belying the distance covered. He'd pause to look in a shop window, and the reflection would show him looking not at the display, but in her general direction, a placid, unconcerned expression on his face. He wasn't just being followed, he was allowing it. He was leading the dance. Her frustration mounted. This wasn't a tale, it was a game, and he was toying with her. At the Berlin Central U-Bahn station, the crowds thickened. It was a sea of bodies, a perfect environment for a spy to disappear. Or to be disappeared from. He descended the escalator, and she followed 3 people behind. Her eyes locked on his blonde hair. He moved toward the platform for the southbound train. It was arriving, its brakes screeching. People surged forward. Fiona pressed through the crowd, keeping him in sight. He stopped by a thick concrete support pillar, his back to her. Perfect. She closed the distance, her hand reaching into her coat for a magnetic listening device, no bigger than a button. She would plant it on his coat. Once she had his location, she could break off this humiliating chase and monitor him from a distance. She was 2 feet away. He still hadn't moved. The train doors slid open with a hiss. The crowd jostled her. She took the final step, her fingers brushing the fabric of his coat. And then he was gone. It wasn't that he dodged or ran. In the instant the crowd surged between them, he had simply ceased to be there. She scanned the platform frantically. He hadn't boarded the train. She had been watching the doors. He wasn't behind the pillar. He wasn't anywhere. It was as if the ground had swallowed him whole. The train doors closed, and it pulled away, leaving her on a half-empty platform, her heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and pure, undiluted fury. He had made a fool of her. She composed herself, her training kicking in. She did a systematic sweep of the station exits, the restrooms, the service corridors. Nothing. He had vanished into thin air. Defeated for the night, she boarded the next northbound train, her mind racing, replaying every second, trying to find the mistake, the trick. The train car was crowded. She stood, holding onto a rail, her jaw clenched. She felt a slight bump from someone passing her, a common occurrence. "Excuse me," a man mumbled. She paid him no mind. Her thoughts were on the ghost, on his impossible disappearance. How could a man just? She felt something in her pocket, something that hadn't been there before. Her hand went to her coat, and her fingers closed around a small, cold, metallic object. It was her listening device. A cold shock went through her, colder than any winter night in West Dallas. He hadn't just evaded her. He had circled back, found her in the crowd, identified her, and returned the bug to her pocket without her ever noticing. It was a gesture of such profound contempt, such absolute dominance, that it staggered her. It was a whisper in her ear. "You are not hunting me. You are a child playing with toys, and I am letting you think you are in the game." For the first time since her brutal training had burned all weakness out of her, Fiona Frost felt a flicker of fear. 2 nights later, her frustration had hardened into a cold, sharp resolve. Observation had failed. Tailing had failed. It was time to force the variable. She needed to know his physical capabilities. She needed to see the ghost in action. She found him in a narrow, brick-lined alley in a part of the city that was slowly being demolished to make way for new government housing. He was walking through it, a shortcut on his way home, just as her predictive models suggested he might. Rain slicked the ground, pooling in the crevices between broken paving stones. The air was heavy and cold. Fiona dropped from a fire escape behind him, landing in a silent crouch. She rose, a shadow detaching from other shadows. "You're a hard man to follow," she said, her voice flat. She had discarded her disguises. This was Nightfall, not a mousy student. Naru stopped, but he didn't turn around immediately. He just stood there, his hands in the pockets of his dark jacket. "You're persistent," he replied, his voice calm, echoing slightly in the confined space. "I'll give you that." He turned slowly. His blue eyes weren't hostile. They were just watchful. "What do you want, Agent?" He knew. Of course, he knew. "I want to know what you are." "I'm a ramen chef," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I don't believe you," she stated. And then she attacked. She exploded forward, crossing the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. Her first strike was a knife hand aimed at his carotid artery, a blow designed to incapacitate or kill in a single move. It was a perfect strike, fast and precise. It never landed. Naru, his hands still in his pockets, simply swayed his torso back, the blow missing by a millimeter. The rush of air stirred his blonde hair. Fiona's eyes widened slightly, but her training didn't allow for hesitation. She flowed into her next attack, a spinning back kick aimed at his ribs, a strike with enough force to shatter bone. He didn't block it. He simply took a small step to the side, and her foot swept through the empty air where he had been. He hadn't dodged so much as he had simply ceased to occupy the space she was attacking. It was uncanny. She pressed her assault, a furious, silent storm of martial arts perfection. Every strike was calculated for maximum effect. Every movement was a study in lethal efficiency. She was a weapon honed to a razor's edge by the finest trainers in Wise. And he met it all without taking his hands out of his pockets. He moved like water, flowing around her attacks. He would pivot, and her fist would slam into the brick wall behind him. He would dip, and her leg would sweep over his head. He wasn't just defending, he was redirecting her. A gentle nudge to her elbow sent her stumbling forward. A light touch to her shoulder spun her off balance. He was using her own force against her, making her intricate, deadly dance look like a clumsy, flailing tantrum. Infuriated, she drew a combat knife from a sheath on her ankle. Its blade gleaming in the dim light. She lunged, a vicious upward slash aimed at his abdomen. This time, he acted. His hand finally came out of his pocket. It moved in a blur, not to block the blade, but to clamp down on her wrist. His grip was like steel. Not crushing, but absolute. Immovable. All her momentum, all her strength, ceased to exist. She was frozen, her knife hand trapped. She tried to wrench her arm free, but it was like trying to pull a pole out of concrete. His other hand emerged and gently, almost casually, plucked the knife from her frozen fingers. He held it in his thumb and forefinger for a second, examining it, then let it drop to the ground with a clatter. He still held her wrist. With a simple, fluid twist, he spun her around and pinned her against the cold, wet brick wall. Her arm locked behind her back in a hold that was both inescapable and, somehow, not painful. He was simply controlling her. She struggled for a moment, a pointless, instinctive act of defiance. He was impossibly strong. She was completely at his mercy. Her breath came in ragged bursts, a mixture of exertion and shock. He leaned in close, his face just inches from hers. His breath was warm in the cold air. His blue eyes held no anger, only a profound, piercing clarity. "You're very good," he said, and his voice was not mocking. It was a genuine, quiet assessment. "Fast, precise, strong. But you're fighting with your head, not your heart." He paused, and his gaze seemed to penetrate straight through her years of conditioning, her walls of ice, and lay bare the very core of her being. "Your heart is too loud. It's screaming for your handler's approval. You don't want to know who I am. You just want to succeed for him." The word struck her with more force than any physical blow. He saw her. He saw her desperate, pathetic need to be seen as worthy by twilight, a weakness she barely admitted to herself. He released her as suddenly as he had grabbed her. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the opposite wall, her wrist throbbing where he had held it. She spun around, her mind reeling, ready to, what? She didn't know, but the alley was empty. He was gone. The only evidence he had ever been there was her knife lying on the wet ground and the echo of his words in her shattered composure. Fiona Frost, Agent Nightfall, leaned against the wall, the rain mingling with the cold sweat on her brow, and for the first time, she questioned not just her mission, but everything she thought she knew about strength. Your forger hated galas, the fake smiles, the stilted conversation, the uncomfortable dresses. Tonight was a particularly lavish affair, hosted by an Austonian industrialist named Gregor Stahl, a man celebrating a new contract with the state. The lights were too bright, the champagne was too bubbly, and the air was thick with sycophantic pleasantries. Her husband, Lloyd, was a master in these environments, navigating the currents of power. With a disarming smile and a sharp mind. Yor just tried not to spill anything on her borrowed gown or accidentally crush the hand of the diplomat who insisted on kissing it. But tonight, she wasn't just Lloyd's escort. She was the Thorn Princess. The shopkeeper's orders had been delivered in a whisper over a dead phone line. Gregor Stahl was a traitor, selling weapons designs to a radical faction in a neighboring country, arming them for a potential border skirmish. The sale was being finalized tonight, in his private office, during the party. Her job? Retrieve the schematics and ensure Stahl never made another deal again. Excusing herself to freshen up, Yor slipped away from the glittering ballroom. The shift was instantaneous. The slightly awkward, smiling Mrs. Forger vanished. The Thorn Princess emerged. Her movements became silent, her senses sharp. She flowed through the service corridors of the Grand Hotel, a black-clad wraith. Stahl's office was on the top floor, in his private penthouse suite. The security was heavy. Guards in the hallways, keycard locks on the doors. Child's play. She dealt with the hallway patrols with silent, non-lethal takedowns, leaving them unconscious in supply closets. The locked door was a minor obstacle for a woman who could punch through brick. A carefully applied, near-soundless push, and the lock mechanism shattered internally. The office was opulent and empty. The deal hadn't happened yet. She found the safe hidden behind a large oil painting. It was a top-of-the-line model. She didn't know the combination. It didn't matter. She placed her fingers on the dial, closed her eyes, and listened to the faint clicks of the tumblers, a skill she'd picked up out of necessity. It took her less than a minute. Inside were the schematics. Shish. He tucked them into a hidden pocket of her dress. Now, she just had to wait for Stahl. She didn't have to wait long. But it wasn't Stahl who entered. It was a squad of 6 men in the dark gray uniforms of the State Security Service. The SSS, Yuri's colleagues. They burst into the room, weapons raised. Freeze. SSS. Their leader barked. Yor froze, her mind racing. They had been tipped off. This was a trap, not for her, specifically, but for whoever was after Stahl. She was caught. Hands in the air. Turn around. Slowly. She could kill them all. In the space of 3 heartbeats, all 6 of them would be dead or dying on the expensive carpet. But she couldn't. They were SSS. If a squad of SSS agents were found slaughtered in a high-profile hotel, the investigation would be massive. It would lead back to the city hall, to her life. To Lloyd and Anya, she couldn't risk it. She slowly raised her hands, her mind calculating angles, escape routes. The windows were reinforced. The door was blocked. She was cornered. Well, the SSS captain sneered. Look what we have here. A pretty little thief. You'll have a lot of explaining to do at headquarters. Suddenly, the lights went out. The entire penthouse was plunged into absolute darkness. The SSS agents swore, fumbling for flashlights. Yor's eyes, already accustomed to the dim light of the office, adjusted faster. She could hear their panicked breathing, their shuffling feet. Then she heard another sound. A soft thud, a choked gasp. One of the life forces in the room vanished from her senses. What was that? One of the agents whispered frantically. Thwump. Another gasp. A second one gone. Panic began to set in. Who's there? Show yourself. A blur of motion, darker than the darkness itself, moved through the room. Yor could just make it out, a fluid, ghost-like shape. It moved with a preternatural silence and a terrifying speed. It wasn't killing them, she realized. It was disabling them. A sharp chop here, a sweeping kick there. The sounds were of bodies hitting the floor, not of lethal blows. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. Silence returned. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, eerie glow over the room. 5 of the SSS agents were unconscious on the floor. The captain was still standing, held in a one-handed grip by his throat, his feet dangling a few inches off the ground. Holding him was Naru, the ramen chef. He was dressed in the same dark clothes Fiona had seen him in, and his expression was cold and hard. He looked at Yor, his blue eyes locking with hers. There was no surprise in his gaze. Only recognition. Yor breathed, a wave of shock washing over her. Naru glanced at the terrified SSS captain, then tossed him aside like a sack of potatoes. The man landed in a heap and didn't move. Naru turned his full attention to her. Looks like you're having a more exciting night than I am, he said, his voice a low rumble. Before she could process the sheer absurdity of He situation, the kindly ramen chef who gave her daughter extra fish cakes dismantling a squad of secret police, the sound of running footsteps echoed from the hall. Reinforcements. We have to go, Naru said, his voice taking on a tone of command. He grabbed her hand. His touch was warm and firm, and pulled her toward the large windows. This way. They're reinforced, she said. Everything breaks, he replied simply. He didn't punch it. He didn't kick it. He placed his palm flat against the glass, and for a fraction of a second, a faint blue light seemed to shimmer around his hand. The armored glass didn't shatter. It spider-webbed into 1,000 cracks, then crumbled outward into the night with a soft cascade of sound. He pulled her through the opening onto a wide balcony. The rain had stopped, and the city sprawled out beneath them, a glittering tapestry of lights. He led her to the edge, looked down, then looked at her. Can you make that rooftop? He asked, pointing to the adjacent building. A good 20 feet away and 1 story down. For Yor, it was an easy jump. She nodded. Good, he said, and without another word, he leapt. He didn't just jump. He flew, covering the distance with an impossible soaring grace and landing in a silent crouch on the other roof. Yor followed, her own powerful leap feeling almost clumsy by comparison. She landed beside him. They stood there for a moment, 2 figures in the dark. The sounds of the gala and the sirens growing faint below. She stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the 2 images, the gentle chef and the silent, Ove. R.W. Helming warrior who had just appeared out of nowhere to save her. How did you know? She asked. I felt you, he said simply, as if it were the most natural explanation in the world. He looked at her, at the lethal elegance of her black dress, at the golden weapons she still held clutched in her hands. He didn't look shocked or afraid. He looked understanding. "Thorn Princess," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. He knew. Yor tensed, ready for a fight, for denial. But looking into his eyes, she saw no judgment. Only a shared secret. "And you," she countered, her voice low. "The ghost of Berlin, I presume." He gave a small, wry smile. "I'm just a ramen chef." They stood in silence for a moment, two monsters on a rooftop, hidden from a world that would never understand them. Yor, the assassin who craved normalcy. And Naru, the fallen god who sought only quiet. "It's hard, isn't it?" She found herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. Trying to be normal, pretending. His smile faded, replaced by that ancient sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes at the stand. "Harder than any fight," he agreed. He looked out over the city. "I had a home once. In a previous life, I fought to protect it. I fought for peace. And in the end, I lost everything. Everyone." The simple, stark honesty of his words hit her with a surprising force. He wasn't just a killer or a phantom. He was a survivor. He was lonely, just like her. The chasm of isolation she had lived in her entire life suddenly felt a little less empty. There was someone else standing in it with her. A bond, forged in silent violence and quiet understanding, formed between them on that rooftop, under the watchful eyes of the Berlin moon. The next morning, the sun rose on a city that was none the wiser. Minister Hoffman's daughter was safe, Gregor Stahl's death was ruled a heart attack, and Agent Nightfall was filing a report that was a masterpiece of omission and veiled frustration. Uru unlocked the door to his ramen stand, the familiar scent of his sanctuary a welcome comfort after a night of chaos. His quiet life was becoming increasingly complicated. He had connected with Yor on a level he hadn't anticipated. And he had thoroughly humiliated, and intrigued, a top-tier Westalian agent. These were not ingredients for a peaceful existence. He began his morning prep, his move-em. As precise and meditative as always. But his senses were on high alert, scanning the ambient thrum of the city for anything unusual. As he reached under the counter for a fresh sack of flour, his fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. It was a small, cardboard box, tucked away in the deepest corner of the shelf. He hadn't put it there. He pulled it out cautiously. There was no writing on it. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a small, dead canary. Its yellow feathers were pristine, its form perfect, except for the fact that its life was gone. And tied around its delicate leg was a small, metallic tag, cold and sterile, stamped with a single, bizarre symbol, a serpent eating its own tail, intertwined with the shape of a chimera. Naru stared at the bird. This wasn't the work of Wise. It wasn't the garden. It wasn't the SSS. This was a message, cold, clinical, and utterly alien. It was a biologist's specimen tag, a collector's trophy. It was a hunter's calling card. Someone, or something, had entered his sanctuary, bypassed his senses, and left this warning. They weren't just watching him. They were studying him. The fragile peak he had fought to build for himself had just been put on notice. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Operation Unlikely Alliance. The dead canary was an anchor, pulling Naru's thoughts down into the cold, dark depths of his past. He had seen countless horrors, faced down beings of immense power, and witnessed the end of a world. Yet this small, sterile act of intimidation, the clinical placement of a dead bird and a metallic tag, felt deeply personally profane. It was an invasion not of his city or his mission, but of his sanctuary. The one place he had allowed himself to feel a fragile sense of peace. The chimera, whatever it was, had crossed a line. He didn't dispose of the bird. He examined it. His fingers, sensitive enough to feel the subtle flow of chakra, now traced the bird's form, feeling for anything out of the ordinary. There was a faint, residual energy clinging to the metallic tag, an echo of whoever had placed it there. It was unnatural, a frequency that hummed with the sterile call. DNESS of a laboratory and the sharp tang of ozone, like malfunctioning high-voltage equipment. It was a trail, faint and fading, but it was there. For 2 days, He followed it. Closing the ramen stand. Early under the pretense of a stock shortage, Naru became a ghost once more. He let his senses guide him, a human divining rod seeking a poison well. The trail led him not to a specific place, but through a pattern of locations. A nondescript office building downtown where the energy signature lingered in a ventilation shaft. A quiet park where it clung to a particular bench. A public records office in the municipal archives. It wasn't a path of travel, it was a path of research. Whoever had targeted him was building a file, and they were using the city's own infrastructure to do it. His sensory hunt finally led him to a name, dredged from the archives by the lingering energy. Dr. Aris Albrecht, a disgraced biochemist from a prestigious Eastern university, officially censured for unethical research protocols. Unofficially, rumors persisted of grotesque experiments in cellular regeneration and bioaugmentation. The trail of cold energy pulsed strongest around Albrecht's name. This was his connection. A little more digging through back alley information brokers, old contacts from his early days as a fixer, painted a clearer picture. Dr. Albrecht had fled his home country and was seeking asylum in the West, promising groundbreaking weapons research in exchange for protection. He was currently in Austonian custody, a high-value asset being prepped for a clandestine transfer to West Dallas. The pieces clicked into place with grim certainty. Albrecht's research, his disgrace, the cold and unnatural energy signature, the canary, it all pointed to the same thing. This chimera project was real. It was involved in human experimentation, and Albrecht was either a part of it or held the key to understanding it. Naru had to get to him. Not to kill him, not to save him, but to interrogate him. He needed to know what was coming for his quiet life. He needed to know the name of the hunter who had left a trophy at his door. "He is a ghost, handler," Fiona Frost stated, her voice a tightly controlled monotone that did nothing to conceal the undercurrent of raw frustration. She stood at attention in the sterile briefing room, facing Sylvia Sherwood. Twilight stood off to the side, his expression unreadable. "He is physically superior, preternaturally aware, and operates outside any known doctrine." Direct engagement proved inconclusive. Inconclusive. Sylvia raised a skeptical eyebrow. A plume of smoke curling from her lips. "My field report says he disarmed you, neutralized you, and then vanished after delivering a rather condescending psychoanalysis." "That sounds fairly conclusive to me." Nightfall. Fiona's jaw tightened, but her expression remained a mask of stone. "My assessment of his physical threat level was incomplete. I created a scenario to test his upper limits. It was a lie, a reframing of her utter humiliation into a calculated tactical decision. Lloyd saw through it instantly. Sylvia likely did too, but she let it slide. "And what is your new assessment?" Lloyd asked, his voice calm and even, cutting through the tension. "His strength and speed are at the absolute peak of human potential, possibly beyond. He fights with a fluidity I've never encountered. It's not a trained style. It's pure instinct, honed to a level of mastery that is frankly impossible. But his greatest weapon is his awareness. He anticipated my every move. He knew I was an agent. He knew I was tracking him. It's more than just good observation, it's like he has a sixth sense." Lloyd's brow furrowed. He had dealt with masters of observation before, but what Fiona was describing sounded like something else entirely. "A psychic. Unlikely," Fiona countered immediately. There was no indication of telepathy or precognition in the classic sense. It was more tactile, more immediate. He reacts to intent, not action. Sylvia stubbed out her cigarette. "Whether he's a psychic or just a freak of nature, he is a complication. And our current priority leaves no room for complications. Dr. Aris Albrecht, the East is turning him over to us in 48 hours. He's a monster, a butcher who experimented on political prisoners, but his research on cellular decay and rapid regeneration could be a game changer for our deep cover agents. The SSS is handling his transport to a neutral exchange point on the Meridian Bridge. Your mission, Nightfall, is to provide remote overwatch. And ensure that transfer goes smoothly. No direct contact. Just make sure the package is delivered. We cannot let the SSS or any other party interfere." "And the ghost?" Fiona asked, a sharp edge to her voice. "Is to be avoided," Sylvia commanded. "We don't know his allegiances. We don't know his motives. If he shows up, You observe and you report. You do not engage. Is that understood? Fiona's pride stung. She was being told to run from a fight. But an order was an order. Understood, handler. As she turned to leave, Lloyd spoke, his tone thoughtful. One more thing, Nightfall. The intel on Albrecht. His official file is thick. But the unofficial rumors are more concerning. Whispers of trying to awaken latent human abilities. Creating super soldiers. It was all dismissed as delusional ranting. And now, Fiona asked. Lloyd looked at her, his gaze serious. And now we have a ghost in Berlin who can dismantle a spy like you without breaking a sweat. It might be a coincidence. But I'm growing tired of coincidences. Your forger hummed a cheerful, slightly off-key tune as she packed Anya's lunch. A sandwich cut into the shape of a star, a few slices of apple, and a small container of peanuts. Lloyd had reminded her that Anya liked peanuts. It was these little details of normalcy, these small acts of domesticity, that she cherished. They were the anchors that kept her tethered to the life she was so desperately trying to build. Her shared moment with Naru on the rooftop 2 nights ago had left a strange resonance within her. It wasn't romantic. It was recognition. For the first time, she had met someone who saw the Thorn Princess not as a monster to be feared or a tool to be used, but simply as a fact. A part of who she was. His quiet admission of his own loss, his own past, had made her feel, paradoxically, less alone in her own profound isolation. She found herself thinking of his calm blue eyes and the ramen he made, the two things seeming inextricably linked. A symbol of the peace he projected and the storm he concealed. The phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the morning quiet. It was the private line, the one that only ever meant one thing. Yor's humming stopped. She glanced at the clock. Lloyd had already left for work. Anya was still getting dressed. She answered. Hello. City Hall, clerical desk. The voice on the other end was dry and raspy, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. The shopkeeper. A delivery of roses has been scheduled for tonight. Red roses, for a man who has sown thorns. It was code. A new contract. The target is Dr. Aris Albrecht. The voice continued, devoid of any emotion. A war criminal responsible for the deaths of hundreds of our countrymen in his so-called medical facilities. He has sold his allegiance to the West and is being transported tonight. His continued existence is an insult to his victims. The garden does not abide such insults. Yor's hand tightened on the receiver. Dr. Albrecht. She had read his name in the papers. The sanitized version of the story. The transport will take place on the Meridian Bridge at midnight. The SSS will be providing his escort. You are to intercept the convoy. Your mission is extermination. The research he carries is irrelevant. The man himself must be erased. And the escort? Yor asked, her voice low. They are Ostanian officers. Avoid fatalities if possible, but the mission is absolute. The weed must be pulled. Do you understand, Thorn Princess? Understood, Yor said, her voice turning flat and cold, the cheerful housewife dissolving like mist. She hung up the phone. Her gaze fell on the star-shaped sandwich. A war criminal, a butcher. Men like that were the reason the garden existed. To protect the soil of their nation so that normal people, normal families, could have their picnics and pack their star-shaped sandwiches in peace. It was her duty. But the Meridian Bridge, a public space, a high-security transport, it would be difficult, messy. And there was a nagging thought in the back of her mind. A premonition, a feeling that the shadows on that bridge tonight would be far more crowded than the shopkeeper anticipated. The Meridian Bridge was a monument of concrete and steel, a stark artery connecting the eastern and western sectors of the divided city. Tonight, it was a ghost road, closed to civilian traffic. A light, persistent rain fell, making the asphalt gleam under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. The river below was a churning mass of black water. Fiona Frost lay prone on the superstructure of a building overlooking the eastern approach, a high-powered sniper rifle not for firing, but for observation, trained on the bridge. Her comms were silent, patched directly to Lloyd, who was monitoring. From a mobile command unit 3 blocks away. Convoy is approaching the checkpoint, she reported, her voice a low whisper. 2 SSS sedans, 1 armored transport van in the middle. Standard formation. No deviations. Copy that. Nightfall. Lloyd's voice came back, calm and professional. Keep your eyes open. If the ghost is going to make a move, this is where it will happen. Fiona didn't need the reminder. Every nerve in her body was alight. She wasn't just looking for the convoy. She was scanning the shadows, the rooftops, the dark spaces between the lights, searching for a phantom. At the same time, hidden in the steel latticework beneath the bridge, Yor Forger waited. She was a coiled spring of lethal energy, her golden stilettos clutched in her hands. The rumbling of the convoy vibrated through the metal structure. Her plan was simple and direct. As the van passed over her position, she would punch up through the undercarriage, neutralize Albrecht, and melt away into the river below. It was brutally effective. It was her style. And a quarter-mile downriver, perched atop the highest point of the bridge's central arch like a gargoyle, Naru watched them all. His sensory abilities painted a clear picture in his mind. He felt the nervous energy of the SSS guards. He felt the cold, focused intent of Fiona, a sharp needle of concentration on the rooftop. He felt the explosive, suppressed power of Yor, a dormant volcano of violence waiting beneath the road. And in the van, he felt the life force of Dr. Albrecht, a greasy, flickering candle flame, slick with fear and a repulsive, arrogant cruelty. They were all here, the spy, the assassin, and their target, a perfect storm of conflicting agendas. He had no intention of fighting either woman. His goal was Albrecht. He would let them make their move, create the chaos, and in the ensuing confusion, he would snatch his prize. The convoy rolled onto the bridge. The first move was Yor's. Just as the armored van crossed the midpoint, she struck. Her fist, imbued with her monstrous strength, slammed upward. There was a screech of tortured metal as the floor of the van buckled violently, erupting into the cabin like a metal volcano. The vehicle swerved wildly, its tires shrieking, and crashed into the guardrail with a deafening groan of steel. Contact! Fiona yelled into her comms. An unknown hostile has engaged the convoy. Direct assault from below. The doors of the SSS sedans flew open, agents pouring out, weapons drawn, shouting into the rain. From the ruptured belly of the van, Yor emerged, a fearsome silhouette against the lights. She moved with impossible speed, a black blur that disarmed two agents before they could even aim their weapons, her strikes precise and disabling. "It's a woman," Fiona reported, her voice laced with disbelief as she zoomed in with her scope. Black dress, incredible speed and strength. It matched the profile of the mysterious, Thorn Princess, from the Garden's rumored roster. Objective appears to be assassination. Do not engage, Nightfall. Lloyd's voice was sharp. Let the SSS handle it. But Fiona saw an opportunity. With the SSS focused on Yor, the prize was vulnerable. The asset is exposed. I'm moving in. Ignoring Lloyd's order, she rappelled down the side of the building, a silent shadow detaching from the wall, sprinting toward the chaos on the bridge. This was the moment Naru had been waiting for. The board was in disarray. He dropped from the arch, landing on the slick pavement with no more sound than a raindrop. He began moving toward the crippled van, a phantom weaving through the confusion. Yor, fending off two more SSS agents, saw a flash of movement. Fiona, closing in fast, her objective the back of the van. The two women's paths were about to intersect. Their missions were in direct opposition. Yor lunged to block her path, her golden stiletto arcing toward Fiona's throat. Fiona, seeing the attack, drew her own blade, parrying with a shower of sparks. The spy and the assassin, two of the most dangerous women on the continent, were locked in combat in the middle of the bridge, their movements a blur of deadly grace. Naru ignored them. He reached the van. Inside, drive. Albrecht was crawling from the wreckage, a briefcase clutched in his hand. He saw Naru approaching, his eyes wide with terror. "Stay back," he shrieked. "I have SSS protection." Naru didn't say a word. He reached for the doctor. And then they came. They didn't arrive in vehicles. They came over the sides of the bridge, scaling the sheer concrete walls from the dark river below. 5 of them. They moved with an unnatural, synchronized gait, their bodies clad in dark, form-fitting tactical gear that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were obscured by reflective, insect-like masks. Project Chimera's hunters. They ignored Yor and Fiona. They ignored the SSS. They moved with a singular, terrifying purpose toward the van. Toward Albrecht. and toward Naru. The SS agents turned their weapons on the new arrivals. "Identify yourselves," one shouted. The response was a volley of high-velocity flechettes from one of the hunters, sharp metallic darts that moved faster than the eye could see. The SSS agents were cut down in an instant, their bodies collapsing to the pavement, their uniforms dark with blood. The attack was brutally, inhumanly efficient. Yor and Fiona broke off their fight, both instinctively recognizing the greater threat. These new arrivals were different. They moved like a pack of wolves, their energy signatures a cold, unified hum of malice. One of the hunters, a massive brute of a man, charged Naru. He was 2 heads taller than a normal person, his arms as thick as tree trunks. He swung a fist that could shatter concrete. Naru met the blow with his forearm. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, and the ground beneath Naru's feet cracked. He was pushed back a single step, his eyes wide with surprise. This thing was strong. As strong as Tsunade. Another hunter, slender and impossibly fast, went for Albrecht. Yor intercepted, her stiletto meeting the hunter's forearm. Instead of piercing flesh, it scraped against something with a high-pitched shriek. Subdermal armor. The hunter countered with a spinning kick that Yor barely managed to block, the force of it sending her stumbling back. Fiona engaged a third, drawing H.R. pistols and firing a rapid succession of shots. The bullets sparked against the hunter's gear, having no effect. The hunter lunged, and Fiona was forced into a desperate, defensive fight, her précis. Say martial arts barely keeping the creature's relentless assault at bay. They were being overwhelmed. Fiona was disarmed, a vicious blow sending her pistol flying. The hunter she was fighting slammed her against the side of the van. Its gloved hand wrapping around her throat, lifting her off the ground. Her vision started to tunnel. Yor was fighting 2 at once. Her raw power was immense, but they were coordinated. Their attacks perfectly timed to keep her off balance, forcing her into a defensive posture she hated. A well-aimed strike from one slipped past her guard, catching her in the ribs. She gasped, pain flaring through her side. She was vulnerable. One of the hunters raised a bladed arm for a killing blow. Naru, locked in a brutal contest of strength with the huge hunter, saw it all. He saw Fiona choking, her life fading. He saw Yor, wounded and about to be struck down. In that instant, the quiet ramen chef was gone. The weary survivor vanished. The sleeping cage of the hidden leaf awoke. A surge of raw, primal power exploded from him. He roared, a sound of pure, untamed fury, and with a final, desperate push, he channeled a sliver of his remaining chakra into his arm. He didn't just block the brute's punch. He shattered it. There was a sickening crack of bone and metal as the hunter's entire arm was obliterated from the elbow down. The brute stared at its ruined limb in disbelief. Naru didn't hesitate. He spun, crossing the distance to Yor in an instant, a blur of motion. He arrived just as the bladed arm descended. He didn't block it. He caught it. His hand clamped around the hunter's wrist, stopping the killing blow inches from Yor's face. Then he moved past her, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He slammed an elbow into the throat of the hunter, threatening Fiona, forcing it to release her. Fiona dropped to the ground, gasping for air. The 3 remaining hunters regrouped, their insect-like masks turning to face this single, explosive threat. Naru stood between them and the 2 women. His body a shield, his blue eyes burned with a cold, lethal fire. "We can fight each other later," he said, his voice a low, commanding growl that cut through the sound of the rain and the groaning metal. He wasn't speaking to the hunters. He was speaking to Fiona and Yor. "Right now, we live." It wasn't a request. It was a fact. Yor pushed herself to her feet, her hand pressed against her injured ribs. Her eyes wide, she looked at Naru, at the sheer, overwhelming power radiating from him, and felt not fear, but a strange sense of awe. Fiona, still catching her breath, looked from the crumpled SSS bodies to the inhuman hunters, and then to the man who had just saved her life. Her cold, logical world had been shattered. All that was left was the primal instinct to survive. She nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. Yor raised her golden weapons, a silent assent. The hunters attacked as one. What followed was not a fight. It was a symphony of destruction. Thorn Princess, left flank. Overwhelm them. Naru commanded, his voice the unwavering center of the storm. Nightfall, right flank. Cripple them. I'll take the middle. His battle-honed tactical mind, forged in a war against an army of 10,000, took control. Yor, freed from the need for tactics, became what she was meant to be, an unstoppable force of nature. She moved in a whirlwind of black and gold, her attacks no longer constrained, each strike a killing blow that shattered armor and bone. The two hunters facing her were thrown into a desperate defense. Fiona, guided by Naruto's direction, became the scalpel. She abandoned her attempts at direct confrontation and instead harried her target, her movements swift and precise. She used her agility to target joints, to slash at hydraulic cables she spotted in their armor, to throw them off balance. She was the perfect distraction, a hornet they couldn't swat. And Naruto was the anchor. He faced the massive brute again, but this time, he wasn't just defending. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, his hands and feet a blur. He met the brute's overwhelming force not with equal force, but with perfect technique, redirecting its clumsy, powerful blows, using its own momentum to throw it off balance. He struck at nerve clusters, at joints, at the weak points in its armor that his senses screamed out to him. Now, Yor, he shouted. Yor, having just dispatched one of her opponents with a devastating kick that sent it flying into the river, heard his call. She saw Naruto create an opening, forcing the brute to overextend. She launched herself forward, her golden stiletto aimed at the brute's unarmored neck. The blade struck true, and the giant collapsed with a wet gurgle. The last two hunters, seeing the tide turn so catastrophically, did not fight to the death. They shared a single, silent look, and then one of them fired a smoke grenade at their feet. Thick, black smoke flooded the bridge. When it cleared, they were gone. They had taken their dead with them, leaving only the SSS bodies and the wreckage. In the sudden, ringing silence, the three of them stood in the center of the carnage. Naruto, his chest heaving, the blue fire in his eyes slowly banking. Yor, clutching her side, breathing heavily. Fiona, leaning against the van, her professional composure completely gone, replaced by a raw, shell-shocked stare. The animosity was gone. The rivalry was forgotten. In its place was a deep, grudging, and profound respect. They had faced a truly monstrous threat, and they had survived only by trusting in the strength of the others. Naruto turned his attention back to the van. The briefcase was there, but Drive, Albrecht was gone. In the chaos of the final moments, he had been snatched. Or he had simply vanished. He's gone, Fiona stated. The spy in her reasserting itself, cataloging the mission failure. So are they, Yor added, looking at the empty space where the hunters had been. Naruto didn't say anything. He walked over to the spot where the last hunter had fallen and picked up one of the flechettes that had missed its mark. He rolled the cold, sharp piece of metal between his fingers. He had his answer. He knew the name of the hunter now. And he knew they would be back. From his surveillance van a few blocks away, Lloyd Forger lowered his binoculars, his face pale. He had heard everything. He had seen most of it. He had seen his quiet, clumsy wife move with the grace and lethality of a demon. He had seen his best agent, Nightfall, utterly defeated and then saved. And he had seen the quiet ramen chef, Naruto, transform into a battlefield commander with the power of a demigod. And he had seen them work together. A unit more terrifying and effective than any Team Wise could ever hope to assemble. Operation Strix, the peace of the world, all of it suddenly seemed so fragile. A new player was on the board, a player with pieces that could shatter the entire game. And his wife, his colleague, and a mysterious stranger were standing right at the center of it. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Whispers of Chimera. The aftermath on the Meridian Bridge was a study in controlled chaos. Within minutes, Wise, cleaners, disguised as city road workers had descended, scrubbing the scene of any evidence that didn't fit the official narrative. The SSS bodies were collected, the wrecked vehicles were hauled away. And the story was set in stone, a tragic, high-speed accident caused by the torrential rain. It was a neat, tidy lie, a paper-thin bandage over a gaping wound. Lloyd Forger stood in the downpour long after his team had left. The sanitized bridge looking unnervingly normal. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and contingency plans, was a maelstrom. He had reread Fiona's after-action report a dozen times. It was clinically precise, detailing the hunters, impossible physiology, their coordinated tactics, and their complete immunity to conventional firearms. He'd cross-refer, "Enst it with yours." Official statement to the SSS about being caught in the accident on her way home from a late-night grocery run. A story so flimsy it was insulting, yet one the SSS had to accept to avoid admitting their catastrophic failure. But the reports were just data. What haunted him was what he had seen through his binoculars, what he had heard over Fiona's open comm. The raw, unrestrained power. The perfect, terrifying synergy between three people who should have been enemies. Naruto's voice, ringing with the authority of a general commanding his legions. The way Yor and Fiona, 2-0, the most fiercely independent and dangerous individuals he knew, had instinctively fallen into formation under that command. This wasn't a vigilante or a rogue agent. This was something else, a force of nature wearing a human face. Operation Strix was about preventing a war between nations. But the battle on the bridge, that felt like the skirmish of a completely different, and far more terrifying, war. One fought in the shadows by monsters and ghosts. Prometheus sat in a room that was more a nexus than an office. The walls were not walls, but floor-to-ceiling screens displaying a constant, silent flood of data. Stock market tickers, encrypted military chatter, live satellite feeds of global capitals, and the faint, fluctuating energy signatures of every nascent metanormal his network had flagged on the planet. He was a man of indeterminate age, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes that held the cold, ancient light of a dying star. He was dressed not in a uniform or a lab coat, but in a simple, perfectly tailored suit that made him look like the CEO of the world. On the central screen, he watched the Meridian Bridge incident for the 20th time. The footage was a composite feed from a dozen micro-drones he had blanketed the area with. He didn't watch the fight. He watched the energy signatures. The Thorn Princess was a brilliant, explosive nova of raw physical power. A beautiful, simple anomaly. Nightfall was a marvel of human conditioning, honed to a razor's edge, but ultimately, still human. His hunters were his own creation, marvels of bioengineering and surgical enhancement. They were the future of warfare as he had designed it. And then there was the ramen chef, Naruto. When Prometheus looked at his energy signature, he didn't see a simple anomaly. He saw a kindred spirit. He saw a soul that was, like his own, fundamentally alien to this world. But where Prometheus's own soul energy was a sharp, piercing spike of psychic power, a rapier of pure will, Naruto's was a vast, deep, churning ocean of life force. It was ancient, elemental, and possessed a sheer density that dwarfed everything else. The brief, explosive flare of chakra he had used to shatter the hunter's arm was like a single drop of water hinting at the existence of a tidal wave. "He is one of us," Prometheus murmured, his voice a quiet resonance in the sterile room. "A traveler." The door slid open, and a woman with severe features and a lab coat that seemed fused to her skin stepped in. This was Dr. Calaveran, the chief architect of the Hunter program and Prometheus's most devout disciple. "Subject Albrecht has been secured and is prepped for debriefing," she reported, her voice as sterile as the environment. The Hunter team's performance was suboptimal. "The loss of Unit 7 is regrettable." "Regrettable, but informative," Prometheus corrected, not taking his eyes off the screen, which was now frozen on a close-up of Naruto's face, his eyes blazing with cold fire. "We have underestimated him. He's not just a physical specimen. He is suppressing a power that is orders of magnitude greater than we anticipated." He gestured to the other two figures on the screen. "And he has a catalyzing effect on other anomalies. He inspires them. He leads them." A faint, cruel smile touched Prometheus's lips. Acquiring one of them was the objective. Now, acquiring all three has become a necessity. But a direct assault on the man himself is foolish. You do not hunt a leviathan by attacking its head. His gaze shifted to the image of Yor, her face a mask of furious determination as she fought. You attack what it seeks to protect. You find its anchor to this world and you pull. He turned to Dr. Varen, his eyes gleaming with cold, absolute purpose. We will not target the strongest, nor the most connected. We will target the one with the most to lose. The one with a name, a job, a public life. The one with a brother in the SSS and a daughter in the most prestigious school in the country. Prepare a capture team, not hunters. Something quieter, more Insidious. The Thorn Princess has a vulnerability. Her family. The days following the bridge incident were tense and quiet. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled over the trio. Fiona had ceased her surveillance of Naru, her mission officially suspended by wise pending analysis of the new Chimera threat. But she found herself walking past his ramen stand in the evenings, a conflicted moth drawn to a strange, dangerous flame. She told herself it was tactical, a way of keeping an eye on a powerful, unknown variable. She was lying to herself. She was drawn to the absolute certainty he projected, a stark contrast to the world of deception and masks she inhabited. Yor found herself making excuses to visit the stand more often. Sometimes with Anya, sometimes alone for a quick bowl after work. The conversations were simple, mundane. They talked about the weather, about the price of vegetables, about Anya's latest misadventures at school. But underneath the surface of the words, something else was being communicated. A shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the masks they both wore. He never pried. He never asked about the accident on the bridge. He just listened, his blue eyes holding a deep, calming empathy. It was more intoxicating than any praise or affection she had ever received. He saw her, the real her. And he wasn't afraid. Naru maintained his quiet routine, but his senses were stretched taut, a constant, silent vigil over the city. He felt the cold, clinical energy of Chimera, no longer a single trail, but a web, spreading its tendrils through Berlin. They weren't hunting him anymore. They were hunting something else. The focus of their web was not his stand, but a different part of the city. The apartments near City Hall. His blood ran cold. The attack came on a Friday afternoon. It was brutally, elegantly simple. A tanker truck mysteriously jackknifed at a major intersection, snarling traffic for a dozen blocks around Yor's apartment. A small, contained gas leak was reported in the building next door, forcing a limited evacuation that clogged the streets with confused residents. It was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of urban chaos. Yuri Breyer, visiting his sister for an impromptu lunch, was the first to realize something was wrong. He was SSS. He could smell a coordinated operation. As he and Yor were leaving her apartment, their path was blocked by men in city utility uniforms, directing them toward a safe route down a cordoned-off service alley. "This way, sir, miss," one of the men said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Yuri's hand went instinctively to the pistol hidden under his coat. "Who is your commanding officer?" he demanded. The man's smile dropped. "You are the utility worker," moved with a speed that was anything but normal, his hand darting out and striking Yuri in the neck with a small, pressurized hiss. A fast-acting neurotoxin. Yuri's eyes went wide with shock as his limbs refused to obey him, his formidable strength draining away in an instant. He collapsed, his body convulsing. "Yuri!" Yor screamed, her panic real. She moved to help her brother, and the trap sprung. From the shadows of the alley, a dozen figures emerged. They were not the hulking hunters. These were lithe, agile figures in gray tactical gear, their faces hidden by gas masks. They moved with a chilling silence. Yor didn't hesitate. The terrified sister vanished, and the Thorn Princess erupted. She grabbed a nearby trash can lid, using it as a shield and a discus, flinging it with enough force to decapitate a normal man. It slammed into one of the attackers, who merely grunted and absorbed the blow, its torso denting like soft metal. They were enhanced, not as strong as the hunters, but incredibly durable and fast. And they were armed with the same neurotoxin injectors. They weren't trying to kill her. They were trying to capture her. The fight was a desperate, brutal ballet in the narrow alley. Yor was a whirlwind of destruction, her kicks shattering brick, her punches leaving fist-sized dents in the walls. But they were relentless. They swarmed her, their only goal to get close, to land a single touch with their injectors. She was fighting for her life, for her brother's life, and she was surrounded. A misstep, a moment's hesitation, and it would be over. One of them got close, lunging from her blind spot. She spun, kicking him away, but another was there, his hand darting toward her neck. She twisted, the injector grazing her shoulder. A jolt, like ice and fire, shot through her arm. Her movements became a fraction slower. Her strength began to wane. They saw it. They pressed their advantage. The circle tightened. Yor, for the first time. Felt a genuine spike of fear. She was going to lose. Naru was halfway across the city when he felt it. The sudden, violent explosion of Yor's life force, a flare of desperate, furious power. And he felt the other signatures, cold, disciplined, and utterly without malice, the energy of a net closing around a thrashing fish. He dropped the crate of daikon radishes he was carrying. "Sorry," he said to the bewildered grocer. "Emergency." He didn't run on the streets. He ran on the rooftops. He moved in a fluid, continuous blur, leaping gaps between buildings. Hat would be impossible for any normal human. He was a streak of blonde and black against the gray Ostonian sky. His mind was a maelstrom of rage. A cold, focused fury he hadn't felt since the day his village was destroyed. They had come for her. They had attacked his friend. They had threatened the fragile peace he was trying to build. This was no longer about warnings or self-preservation. This was about retribution. He honed in on her fading energy signature, a dying star in a sea of cold static. He arrived at the alley's edge on a rooftop just in time to see her fall. She took down 2 more of the Chimera agents with a final, desperate spinning kick, but the toxin was too much. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The remaining agents swarmed forward, ready to secure their prize. Naru didn't make a sound. He didn't announce his presence. He simply dropped. He landed in their midst like a thunderbolt, the pavement cracking under the force of his arrival. The Chimera agents, so focused on their target, were taken completely by surprise. Naru created a shadow clone. It wasn't a grand display. There wasn't a plume of smoke. One moment there was one Naru. The next there were 2, standing back to back. To the agents, it was as if he had literally split in 2. The battle lasted 7 seconds. Naru and his clone moved in perfect, lethal synchronicity. They didn't use flashy techniques. It was pure, unadulterated taijutsu, delivered with blinding speed and devastating force. Every strike was aimed at a vital point, a throat, a temple, the back of the neck. The enhanced durability of the agents meant nothing against strikes delivered with such precision and focused power. They crumpled like marionettes with their strings cut. Air advanced biology failing against a martial art perfected over 1,000 years. When the last one fell, Naru stood breathing heavily, the clone dissolving back into him. The alley was silent, led with the unconscious forms of Chimera's elite capture team. He rushed to Yor's side. She was conscious, but barely. The neurotoxin was powerful. He could feel it ravaging her system. He gently lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light. She looked up at him, her eyes clouded with pain and confusion. "Naru," she whispered, her voice weak. "I've got you," he said, his voice soft but firm. He looked at Yuri's still convulsing form. The toxin was different for him, reacting with whatever made him tick. Naru pressed 2 fingers to Yuri's neck, sending a small, controlled pulse of chakra into his system. It wasn't enough to heal him, but it would stabilize the toxin, keeping it from doing permanent damage. He then pulled out his own burner phone and sent an anonymous tip to the SSS main dispatch, "Officer down. Central District, Alley 4B. Hostile agents neutralized." He couldn't stay. He couldn't be found here. With Yor in his arms, he leapt, scaling the sheer brick wall of Alley and disappearing back onto the rooftops just as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. In Lloyd Forger's secret apartment, the one even Wise didn't know about, Anya was having a very bad day. Her papa was tense. Her mama hadn't come home from work, and a horrible, spiky feeling of fear was emanating from her Uncle Yuri's office at the SSS. She missed her mama. She clutched the small sheep keychain Yor had given her, a cheap trinket from a street fair, and squeezed her eyes shut, concentrating. Mama, her telepathic mind, usually a chaotic receiver, focused with the desperation of a frightened child. The keychain, imbued with Yor's presence, acted as a strange sort of psychic antenna. For a flashing, terrifying second, Anya's mind wasn't in the apartment. She was in a dark, cold room. The air smelled of metal and chemicals. She saw strange machines with blinking lights. She felt cold, and she felt her mama's fear. Then another image flashed. A man with bright yellow hair, his face grim, fighting scary people in masks. Then, Darkness again. Anya's eyes flew open. She scrambled for her crayons and a piece of paper. With a trembling hand, she began to draw. She didn't know what it meant. But she drew the strange, blinking machines. She drew the cold metal walls. She drew a crude map of hallways and rooms that had burned themselves into her memory. When Lloyd came home, his face a mask of controlled anxiety over Yor's disappearance, Anya shoved the drawing into his hand. "Mama's here," she said, her voice trembling. "The ramen man is with her. They're in a scary place." Lloyd stared at the drawing. It was a child's frantic scribbling, but the layout, it looked like a floor plan. A floor plan for a place he recognized. A decommissioned subterranean power station on the outskirts of the city. A place that had been bought by a shell corporation with ties to a dozen different black market research groups. It was a suspected black site. His blood ran cold. He looked at Anya, then back at the drawing. It was impossible, but if it was true, if Yor had been taken, and if the ghost had gone after her. He made a decision that put Operation Strix, his mission, and his very life on the line. He went to a secure computer and sent an encrypted, anonymous message to a single recipient, Agent Nightfall. It contained only an image, Anya's drawing, and a single coordinate. Fiona Frost received the message on her Wise-issued secured device. It was from a ghost channel, one she knew belonged to Twilight, used only for the diarist, off-the-books emergencies. She saw the drawing, the coordinates. She understood instantly. The Thorn Princess had been taken, and Twilight was pointing her toward the man who had a chance of getting her back. The ghost. She didn't hesitate. Her personal feelings about the Thorn Princess were irrelevant. The organization that had taken her, Chimera, was a threat to global stability. And Naru was the only person who had ever successfully fought them. This wasn't about following orders anymore. This was about confronting the real enemy. She found him not at his stand, but at a small, dusty workshop he kept above an old garage. A place that wasn't on any official record. She didn't know how she knew to look there. She just did. She entered without knocking. The place was Spartan, filled with tools and strange, half-finished mechanical projects. Naru was standing over a workbench, analyzing the Chimera flechette from the bridge. He wasn't surprised to see her. "They took her," Fiona said, dispensing with pleasantries. "I know." Naru's voice was dangerously quiet. "I was too late to stop it. Twilight sent me this," she said, holding up her device to show him Anya's drawing. "It's a black site, a suspected Chimera facility." Naru looked from the drawing to Fiona's face. He saw no deception, no ulterior motive. He saw an agent who had finally found a war worth fighting. And he saw an ally. Their technology is advanced. Their soldiers are enhanced. "A direct assault is suicide," Fiona stated, her tactical mind kicking in. "I don't do direct assaults," Naru said, his eyes glowing with a cold, hard light. "I do infiltration." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I'm going in to get her. Are you with me?" It wasn't a plea for help. It was an offer to witness. "They are a threat to my country," Fiona said, her voice firm. "And you are the only one who has ever stood against them and won. I'm with you." In the sterile white room of the Chimera facility, Yor awoke on a cold metal slab. She was weak, the neurotoxin still singing in her veins. Wires and sensors were attached to her body, feeding data to a bank of monitors. A figure stood in the shadows, watching her. Prometheus. He stepped into the light. "Welcome, Thorn Princess," he said, his voice a smooth, chilling baritone. "Or should I say, Yor Forger. You are a magnificent specimen. A beautiful, perfect aberration. We are going to learn so much from you." Suddenly, a klaxon began to blare throughout the facility. Red lights flashed. On a monitor behind Prometheus, a security feed showed a maintenance tunnel entrance exploding inward. Prometheus's calm expression flickered with annoyance. He turned to a large screen on the wall. It switched to a video feed, a direct communication link. Naru's face filled the screen, cold, furious, and utterly resolute. Prometheus smiled. "Ah, the main event has arrived. I was wondering when you'd show up." "Let her go." Naru's voice was a low growl. "An interesting proposal," Prometheus replied, his tone conversational. "But I think not. She is valuable, as are you, traveler. You and I, we are so much more than these crawling insects." We are from worlds of power, of destiny. This world is a stagnant pond. And I intend to introduce a tidal wave. Join me. Together, we can forge a new order from the ashes of this pathetic Cold War." Naru's face on the screen was a mask of contempt. Quote, "I've seen what men who call themselves gods do to the world. I'm not interested in building a new one." His voice dropped, filled with a promise of absolute violence. "I'm just here to tear yours down. And to get my friend back." The feed cut out. Prometheus stared at the blank screen for a long moment, then let out a soft, appreciative chuckle. "Magnificent," he whispered. "Absolutely magnificent. Let the hunt begin." He turned to a comms panel. "All units, intruder alert. Capture him. I want him alive." He then turned and walked out of the room, leaving Yor alone with the blaring alarms, the flashing lights, and a new, unfamiliar feeling blossoming in her chest. Hope. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Family of Monsters. The Chimera Black Site wasn't just a facility, it was a fortress tomb buried beneath the skin of Berlin. The escape had been a whirlwind of controlled, brutal violence. Naru had been the spearhead, a force of nature that the genetically engineered soldiers and automated defenses could not contain. He moved through the sterile white corridors not like an infiltrator, but like a righteous cataclysm, his every action designed to shatter, disrupt, and destroy. He had used a second shadow clone, a tactic that had stretched his diminished reserves to their breaking point, but it had allowed him and Fiona to be in two places at once, systematically dismantling the Facili Tai's command and control while carving a path to Yor. Fiona, for her part, had been the perfect scalpel. Freed from the constraints of wise protocol and fighting alongside a partner whose power defied all logic. She became something more than just an agent. She was a phantom, her movements economical and deadly, her mind processing the chaos and feeding Naru tactical data in clipped, precise bursts. She disabled security grids, identified structural weaknesses for him to exploit, and covered their retreat with a cold, terrifying efficiency. They found Yor not in a cell, but in a laboratory, a specimen on a table. The sight of her, weakened and vulnerable with needles and sensors attached to her skin, had caused something in Naru to snap. The cold fury he had maintained throughout the infiltration had ignited into a white-hot inferno. The resulting destruction had been extensive. Now, they were in the aftermath. The safe house was one of Naru's oldest, a forgotten tenement apartment in a decaying sector of the city scheduled for demolition in a year. The electricity was siphoned from a neighboring building, the water ran from a rusted tap, but it was off every grid, unregistered, a ghost apartment for a ghost. It smelled of dust and disuse. The only furniture was a threadbare sofa, a single mattress on the floor, and a wooden crate serving as a table. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a heavy, vibrating silence broken only by the drip of a leaky faucet and the ragged sound of their breathing. They were a tableau of exhaustion and pain. Yor was curled on the mattress, wrapped in a thick blanket Naru had produced from a dusty closet. The neurotoxin had been purged from her system, a painful process Naru had facilitated with a precise application of his own chakra, forcing her body to metabolize and expel the foreign chemicals, but it had left her muscles feeling like frayed ropes. Her formidable strength was a distant memory, replaced by a deep, aching weakness she had never known. For the first time since she was a child, she felt fragile. Fiona sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, a portrait of coiled tension. She was cleaning her pistol with sharp, jerky movements, a familiar ritual that did nothing to calm the chaos in her mind. She had disobeyed a direct order from her handler. She had allied herself with an unvetted, godlike entity. She had placed her trust in the Thorn Princess, an enemy of the state. She had witnessed Naru create a solid duplicate of himself out of thin air. Her entire worldview, built on a foundation of rigid rules and predictable outcomes, had been pulverized, and beneath the professional crisis, a more personal one was brewing. The image of Naru, his eyes blazing with protective fury as he tore through Chimera's soldiers to get to Yor, was burned into her memory. It stirred something in her, a feeling that was dangerously close to the unprofessional admiration she held for Twilight, but deeper, and far more potent. Naru was pacing the small room, a caged tiger. He was running on fumes, his chakra reserves scraped dry. The use of 2 clones, the forced purging of the toxin from Yor's system, and the final Explosive exit from the facility had left him more depleted than he had been in years. But it wasn't just physical exhaustion. He was furious with himself. He had let his guard down. He had allowed his quiet life to become a target, and in doing so, had put Yor in the crosshairs. The faces of his past, Jiraiya, his parents, Neji, flickered at the edges of his vision. The familiar ghosts had returned, whispering of his failure to protect those he cared about. He stopped his pacing and knelt beside the mattress where Yor lay. He had a bowl of thin, hot broth in his hands, scavenged from a can of soup he had stashed in the apartment. "You need to eat," he said, his voice softer than it had been all night, the commanding general replaced by the concerned friend. Yor looked at the soup, then at him. Her eyes were shadowed with a mixture of gratitude and deep-seated shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I was weak. They caught me." The words were a confession of what, to her, was the ultimate sin, a failure of strength. Naruto's expression softened. He reached out, his hand gently resting on her forehead, brushing a stray strand of black hair from her face. His touch was warm, steady. "They used a neurotoxin after isolating you with a citywide disruption. They didn't beat you, Yor. They cheated." He took the spoon, scooped a small amount of broth, and held it to her lips. "This wasn't a failure. It was an ambush. There's a difference." Yor stared at him, her lips slightly parted. No one had ever spoken to her like that. In her world, in the garden, weakness was a death sentence. There were no excuses. You survived, or you failed. But Naruto wasn't making excuses for her. He was stating a fact, his belief in her strength unshaken. Hesitantly, she sipped the broth. It was warm and salty, and it felt like life itself flowing back into her. From the sofa, Fiona watched the exchange, her hand stilling on her pistol. She watched the gentleness in Naruto's hands, the quiet understanding in his eyes. She had seen him fight. She had seen him command. But this quiet act of care was, in its own way, more powerful than any display of strength. It was a glimpse of the man behind the monster, the heart within the hurricane. Naruto stood and turned to Fiona, his gaze equally direct. He gestured to a nasty gash on her forearm she'd received from a piece of shrapnel during their escape. "Let me see that. It's a minor laceration. It doesn't require." "Let me see it," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Fiona hesitated, then reluctantly held out her arm. She was used to patching herself up, to treating wounds as mere data points in an after-action report. Naruto took her arm gently, his touch surprisingly light. He examined the cut with a practiced eye, then retrieved a small, battered first aid kit from a cupboard. As he began to clean the wound with an antiseptic wipe, she flinched, not from the sting, but from the simple, unexpected act of another person tending to her. "You fought well tonight," he said, his voice low as he worked. "You think fast. You adapt. You saved us more than once with your quick thinking." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation, delivered with the same factual weight as his analysis of Yor's capture. To Fiona, who lived on the currency of Lloyd's rare, calculated praise, Naruto's simple, direct acknowledgement of her competence was disarmingly potent. "I was merely executing optimal tactical solutions to a fluid combat scenario," she said, her voice reverting to the robotic cadence of an agent's report. Naruto looked up from her arm, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. "Right, and I'm just a ramen chef." He began to bandage the wound, his movements deft and sure. "You don't have to be a machine, Fiona. It's okay to admit you were scared. It's okay to admit you were angry. It's what you do with it that matters." Fiona stared at him, speechless. He had called her Fiona. Not Nightfall, not Agent. He had used her name. The name that belonged to the girl who existed before Wise had reforged her into a weapon. As he finished tying off the bandage, Yor spoke from the mattress, her voice a little stronger now. What are you?" she asked, the question that had been hanging in the air since the night on the rooftop. "When you split in the alley, I saw it." Naruto finished with Fiona's arm and straightened up, a profound weariness settling over him. He walked to the room's single grimy window and looked out at the distant, glittering lights of a city that was not his own. "I'm a relic," he said, his voice quiet, carrying the weight of memory, from a world that chose to burn rather than heal. "I was a soldier. A leader. I fought in a war to save everyone, and in the end, there was nothing left to save. He turned back to face them, his blue eyes holding an ocean of loss. The power I have left is just an echo of what I once was. The splitting, he said, making air quotes with his fingers, is a shadow clone. A solid copy. It was once my signature move. I could make thousands. Now I can barely manage to. He ran a hand through his blonde hair, a gesture of deep-seated exhaustion. I came here with nothing. No home, no family, no friends. I just wanted a quiet life. I wanted to serve noodles and watch the world go by. But it seems the past, even a past from another world, doesn't let go so easily. He looked at both of them, his gaze direct and unflinching. And then I met you too. A government-sanctioned assassin who kills to protect her brother and her country, and who dreams of a normal life. A spy who has buried her heart so deep under duty and discipline she's forgotten it's there. Both of you, hiding your true selves from a world that would call you monsters. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small, dusty room. Prometheus, the man from the facility. He's like me, a traveler from another world. But his world was one of tyranny, and he wants to bring that here. He thinks power is a tool for control, a way to build a better prison. He shook his head. I've seen what gods and saviors do to people. I'd rather be a monster that protects a home than a god that builds one. Silence. The drip from the faucet seemed to echo the beating of their hearts. In that moment, everything clicked into place for both women. He wasn't judging them. He wasn't assessing them as assets or threats. He was identifying with them. He saw their monstrous abilities not as a curse or a tool, but as a part of them, just as his own power was a part of him. He saw their loneliness, their isolation, and he wasn't repelled by it. He was drawn to it. He was one of them. Fiona spoke first, her voice barely a whisper, stripped of its icy shell. When that hunter had me, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I have never been that helpless. It was a confession of weakness, a cardinal sin for an agent of her caliber. She looked at Naru, her eyes filled with a raw, unfamiliar emotion. I was afraid. Yor pushed herself into a sitting position, the blanket falling from her shoulders. I have only ever fought for my country or for my brother, she said. Her voice gaining strength with every word. When they had me on that table, I wasn't thinking about the garden or Ostania. I was thinking about Anya. About this. She gestured vaguely to the room, to the three of them. I don't just want to fight because I'm ordered to. I want to fight for my life. With you. It wasn't a love confession. It was a declaration of allegiance. A pact. Naru looked from Yor's fiercely determined face to Fiona's raw, vulnerable one. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips, the first real smile he'd had all night. The weariness in his eyes receded, replaced by a familiar, burning resolve. He had lost one family. He had been alone for so long. But now, in this dusty, forgotten room, surrounded by a killer and a spy, he felt the first, fragile seed of a new one beginning to grow. They were a family of monsters. And he would be damned if he let anyone harm them. Then that's what we'll do, Naru said, his voice resonating with a newfound purpose. We fight. Together. A sharp rap on the door shattered the moment. Instantly, all three tensed. Fiona had her pistol out, Yor was scrambling for a makeshift weapon, and Naru placed himself in front of them, his body a shield. Who is it? Naru called out, his voice low and dangerous. A familiar, slightly strained voice came from the other side. I'd very much like to not get a hole punched through this door, if at all possible. I come bearing peanuts and information. Naru's eyes widened slightly. He felt the life force on the other side of the door. Anxious, intelligent, and utterly familiar. He shared a look with Fiona, who looked just as bewildered. He opened the door. Lloyd Forger stood in the dimly lit hallway, looking profoundly out of place in his tailored suit. He held up a small bag of peanuts as a peace offering. His eyes, however, were not on Naru. They darted past him to Yor, a flicker of genuine relief crossing his face, before landing on Fiona, a silent question in his gaze. Twilight, Fiona breathed, instinctively straightening up before catching herself. Agent Nightfall, Lloyd said, his voice professionally cool, though his presence here was anything but. He then looked at Naru, his gaze analytical. Searching. And you must be the ghost. Call me Naru, Naru said, his posture relaxed but ready. I see your daughter's artistic talents came in handy. Lloyd's comp. Shore finally cracked for a fraction of a second. The confirmation that Anya's drawing had led them here was a shock he couldn't quite hide. He stepped into the room, his eyes taking in the scene, the Spartan apartment, the wounded women. The palpable tension. My superiors at WISE are classifying Chimera as a global-level threat that supersedes all current directives, Lloyd stated, getting straight to the point. It was a partial truth. WISE was terrified, but he was acting far outside his authority. Operation Strix is compromised if this organization is allowed to operate unchecked. They belly. Eve Prometheus's goal is to intentionally destabilize the East-West peace talks to accelerate global conflict. He looked directly at Naru. WISE wants to contain you. To study you. I think that's a mistake. I think you are the only thing that can stop them. He placed the bag of peanuts and a slim data file on the crate. This is everything WISE has on Chimera. Black sites, suspected personnel, intercepted communications. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm offering an alliance. Off the books. My resources and intel. Your unique skill set. It was an unprecedented gamble. He was betting the success of his mission, and potentially the fate of the world, on this group of unpredictable, super-powered misfits. He was betting on the man who could command his wife and his colleague. Naru looked at the file, then at Lloyd. He felt the man's intent. It was a complex knot of duty, fear, and a desperate, calculated hope. But at its core, it was true. He wanted to stop Chimera. Why? Naru asked simply. Lloyd's gaze flickered again to Yor, then to the floor. My mission is to maintain peace. Prometheus wants to burn the world down to build his own. Our objectives are, for the moment, aligned. He paused. And, my daughter is very fond of her mother. I would like to ensure she remains safe. It was the closest Lloyd Forger could come to an honest, emotional confession. Naru picked up the data file. He looked at Yor, who gave a slight, determined nod. He looked at Fiona, whose expression was a mixture of shock at Twilight's rogue move and resolute agreement. They were in this together. All of them. An unlikely, impossible alliance. All right, Lloyd Forger, Naru said. Let's see what's in the box. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Head. The alliance was as fragile as a spider's web and as tense as a drawn bowstring. Lloyd Forger, spymaster extraordinaire, found himself in the unnerving position of being the least capable person in the room. He was a master of manipulation, planning, and infiltration. But he was a man of skill and intellect in a world that now included beings of impossible power. He provided the framework for their offensive, his mind rapidly processing He raw data from the WISE file and weaving it into a coherent operational plan. The safe house became their war room. Anya's frantic drawing, smoothed out and pinned to the wall, became their map. Lloyd, pointing with the end of a pen, laid out the situation. Chimera's structure is cellular, but all communications and energy expenditure route through a central nexus, he explained, his voice crisp and professional. A thin veneer over the absurdity of the situation. Prometheus is a psychic, a powerful one. It's likely he commands his forces telepathically. Severing the head of the snake is our only viable option. The problem is, we don't know where the head is. The file from WISE was a collection of whispers and shadows. Intercepted financial transactions leading to shell corporations, satellite images of construction projects in politically neutral territories, and fragmented reports of missing scientists. It was a puzzle with 100 pieces missing. Naru, however, wasn't looking at the papers. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his eyes closed, the chimera flechette resting in his open palm. He was meditating, but it was not for peace. He was focusing his senses, using the cold, unnatural energy clinging to the metal dart as a psychic lodestone. He let the web of information Lloyd was weaving fade into the background and instead followed the faint, ethereal threads of energy that connected the dart to its source. It's in the mountains, Naru said suddenly, his voice quiet but cutting through Lloyd's briefing. Everyone fell silent. North of the border, in the neutral zone between Ostania and Westalis. A place that is meant to be empty. Lloyd stopped, staring at him. The Grolian peaks. Our satellite data shows nothing there but an abandoned weather station from the old war. Satellites see what they're meant to see, Naru said, opening his eyes. They held a distant, focused light. I can feel it, a concentration of that cold energy, the same as the dart, the same as the lab. It's shielded, buried deep in the rock, but it's there. It's a tumor in the heart of the mountain. Fiona, who had been listening with unwavering intensity, cross-referenced Naru's claim with the WISE data. There's a shell corporation, Athelred Mining, that purchased the land rights to that entire mountain range 5 years ago. The official reason was exploratory drilling for rare earth metals. The project was declared a failure and abandoned 2 years later. They weren't drilling for metals, Yor said, her voice low. She had recovered quickly, her abnormal physiology burning through the last of the toxin's aftereffects. Now, she was a coiled spring of vengeful energy. They were building. Lloyd's mind worked furiously, the pieces snapping together. A remote location in a neutral, unmonitored zone. A legitimate corporate cover story for massive construction. A location that was both physically and politically isolated. The Serpent's Head, he murmured. It's a fortress. The plan coalesced with a grim, urgent finality. They would not wait for Chimera to make the next move. They would not allow Prometheus to escalate his plans. They would take the fight to him. Lloyd would coordinate logistics and provide a route for extraction. He was their eye in the sky, their link to the outside world. The trio, Naru, Yor, and Fiona, would be the insertion team. The spear. This is a decapitation strike, Fiona stated, her voice cold as ice. In and out. Eliminate the command structure. Retrieve any intelligence on their overarching goals, and destroy the facility. It's not just a decapitation strike, Naru corrected, standing up. The quiet ramen chef was gone, replaced fully by the battle-hardened cage. His presence seemed to shrink the small room. This is a message. We are going to walk into their home, dismantle their throne, and show them that they are not untouchable gods. We are going to show them what real monsters look like. His eyes met Yor's, then Fiona's. There was no hesitation in their gazes. Only a shared, burning resolve. This was no longer just about survival or protecting a quiet life. This was about retribution. The Grolian peaks were a jagged scar across the landscape. A place of sharp rocks, treacherous winds, and perpetual twilight. The abandoned weather station was a rusted skeleton on a high plateau, a decoy for prying eyes. The real facility was buried 1,000 feet below, a state-of-the-art fortress carved into the mountain's core. The trio arrived under the cover of a moonless night, dropped 2 miles out by Reborn. Said cargo plane Lloyd had requisitioned, through a network of smugglers indebted to WISE. They were clad in dark, non-reflective tactical gear. Fiona was a walking arsenal of specialized gadgets, explosives, and blades. Yor carried nothing but the golden stilettos she trusted, her body a far greater weapon than any gun. Naru was armed only with himself. As they approached the plateau, Naru held up a hand, bringing them to a halt. Sensors, he whispered, his eyes closed. A perimeter fence of seismic and heat sensors, buried 3 feet down. And automated gun turrets hidden in the rocks, every 50 yards. Fiona pulled out a sophisticated scanner. It showed nothing. My equipment isn't picking up any of that. The energy readings are clean. They're not powered until they're triggered by a proximity alert, Naru explained. His senses mapping the unseen battlefield. They're dormant, waiting. He pointed to a narrow ravine carved by an ancient stream. The sensors don't cross the ravine bed. It's a blind spot. We go through there. They moved with a synchronized, ghostly silence, Naru in the lead. They slipped past the invisible tripwires and dormant guns, a testament to the fatal flaw in Prometheus's technological omniscience. It couldn't account for a man who could feel the hum of a machine before it was even turned on. The entrance was a massive blast door, seamlessly blended into a rock face. It was impregnable. C4. Yor asked Fiona, her preference for direct solutions clear. It would take half an hour to cut through, Fiona replied, examining the seams. And the explosion would alert the entire continent. Quote, Naru placed his palm on the cold steel. He closed his eyes, focusing. He could feel the complex locking mechanism within, a series of meter-thick titanium bolts. He couldn't vibrate them open like a simple latch. But he could find their weakest point. Fiona, he said, his hand still on the door. I need a shaped charge. Small, high yield, placed right here. He tapped a spot near the central locking bolt. The moment the charge blows, I need you to hit this exact spot with everything you have. The blast will compromise the structural integrity for a fraction of a second. Your impact has to complete the break before the internal alarms can trigger. It was a plan that required impossible timing and precision. Fiona worked quickly, her hands lure as she molded a small block of plastic explosive into the perfect shape, inserting a micro-detonator. Yor stood before the door, her legs braced, her muscles coiling. On my mark, Naruto said, his eyes now focused on Yor. 3, 2, 1, mark. Fiona hit the detonator. A sharp, contained crack echoed in the silence. In the same instant, Yor unleashed a single, devastating punch. Her fist connected with the superheated metal. The sound was not of an impact, but of a sonic boom. The massive door didn't buckle. It shattered inward at the point of impact, the thick titanium bolts shearing with a scream of tortured metal. An alarm klaxon began to blare, but it was too late. They were in. The corridor beyond was sterile and white, a jarring contrast to the rock outside. Instantly, tomated turrets descended from the ceiling, unleashing a hail of laser fire. Go, Naruto commanded. He didn't dodge. He moved directly into the line of fire, his hands a blur as he deflected the cohere. NT light beams with the edge of his palms, a sliver of chakra reinforcing his skin to dissipate the energy. The smell of ozone and burnt flesh filled the air, but he was unharmed. He was a living shield. A one-man storm center drawing all the fire. Under his cover, Yor and Fiona exploded into action. Fiona slid across the floor, firing small EMP grenades that disabled half the turrets. Yor ran up a wall, her incredible speed making her a phantom, and with a series of precise, powerful kicks, demolished the remaining emplacements from their mountings. The corridor was cleared in seconds. Command Center, Fiona said, consulting a schematic she had downloaded from the WISE file. Level 7, Central Core. They descended, a 3-person invading army. Each level was a new layer of hell. A barracks of chimera soldiers, awakened from their sleep, swarmed them. Yor became a whirlwind of death, her movements a beautiful, terrible dance as she carved a path through their ranks, her purpose clear and her resolve absolute. A floor of research labs, filled with horrifying experiments, animals and humans floating in vats, twisted by forced mutation, was neutralized by Fiona, who planted thermal charges. Her face a grim mask of disgust. She was not just destroying a military target, she was cleansing a blight. Naruto acted as the fulcrum, the unbreakable center. He fought where the resistance was heaviest. His presence a beacon for his allies and a terror for his enemies. He created a shadow clone to handle a flanking maneuver, the clone fighting with the same brutal efficiency as the Ori. Ginal before dissolving back into nothingness. He was conserving his energy, his movements economical, each blow delivered with just enough force to neutralize, no more. He was saving himself for what he knew was waiting at the center. They reached level 7. The air here was different. Colder. It hummed with a palpable psychic energy that made the hairs on their arms stand up. The door to the command center was made of a strange, obsidian-like material that seemed to drink the light. This is it, Naruto said, his voice low. Fiona placed a hand on the door. It's not metal. It's some kind of crystalline alloy. My charges won't even scratch it. Before Yor could suggest punching it, the door slid open on its own, revealing a vast, circular chamber. The walls were a mosaic of screens displaying global data. In the center of the room, on a slightly raised dais, stood a single figure. He was tall and powerfully built, his face handsome but marred by a jagged scar that ran down one side. He was clad in armor that seemed forged from the same obsidian material as the door, plates of it shifting and rearranging as he moved. In his hands, he held a massive, high-frequency blade that vibrated with a low hum. This wasn't Prometheus. This was his guard dog. I am Ares, the man announced, his voice a deep, resonant bass filled with arrogant pride. Firstborn of Prometheus, I am the guardian of this sanctum. You have come far, little ghosts, but your journey ends here. Naruto felt the man's soul. Like Prometheus, like himself, Ares was a traveler. His energy was a blade of sharp, brutal steel, forged in a world of endless, bloody conquest. "Yor, Fiona," Naru said without taking his eyes off Ares. "The intel. The consoles. I'll handle him." "We fight with you," Yor protested. "No." Naru's voice was absolute. "He's like me. This is a fight you can't win. Go, now." Fiona hesitated for a fraction of a second, her analytical mind screaming that engaging a superior opponent alone was tactical suicide. But she saw the look in Naru's eyes. It was not fear. It was the predatory certainty of an apex predator that has finally cornered its rival. She grabbed Yor's arm. "He's right. We have a mission." Reluctantly, Yor allowed herself to be pulled away. As she and Fiona rushed to the data consoles, Ares sneered. "You send your women away to do your work while you face me. You have no honor. Honor is for knights," Naru replied, settling into a low fighting stance. "I'm just a ninja." Ares laughed, a booming, arrogant sound. "Then you will die a coward's death." He charged. He moved with a speed that defied his size, his massive blade cleaving the air. Naru met the charge. The fight was a blur of motion. Ares fought with overwhelming power, his blade shattering the floor with every missed strike. Naru, in contrast, was like smoke. He flowed around the attacks, his movements fluid and precise, a testament to a lifetime of fighting opponents far stronger and faster than himself. He wasn't trying to win. He was learning. He was watching Ares' style, his footwork, the way he channeled energy into his blade. Ares grew frustrated. "Stand and fight," he roared, unleashing a furious combination of slashes. Naru dodged and weaved, then saw his opening. He darted in, his hand glowing with a faint blue light. He didn't strike the man. He struck the blade. His chakra infused. Deep palm slammed into the flat of the sword, the impact sending a violent, dissonant frequency through the weapon. Ares cried out as the blade flew from his superheated gauntlets, skittering across the floor. Disarmed, Ares was not defeated. "You think that matters?" he bellowed. He held out his hands, and the metal plates of the floor began to ripple and tear, shards of it flying at Naru like shrapnel. Ares was a ferrokinetic. He controlled metal. The fight escalated. The chamber became a storm of flying steel. Naru was a phantom in the maelstrom, dodging, deflecting, using the walls and ceiling to maneuver. He was fast, but it was taking a toll. He was being worn down. A sharp piece of metal caught his side, tearing through his gear and his skin. He grunted in pain. "I am the master of this world's very bones." Ares roared, levitating dozens of metal shards, all of them pointing at Naru. "You are just a relic of a dead one." Naru looked at the floating daggers, then at Ares' arrogant face. He thought of Yor on the lab table, of Fiona's fear, of the quiet life that this man and his master were trying to destroy. He thought of his home, of the peace he had fought and bled for. The time for holding back was over. He brought his right hand up. He poured every last drop of his remaining chakra, his will, his rage, his very soul into it. A sphere of violent, swirling blue energy began to form in his palm. Its sound a high-pitched, piercing shriek that drowned out the hum of the computers. The Rasengan. It was smaller than the ones he used to wield, more compressed, more unstable. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. Ares' eyes widened in shock at the raw, untamed power emanating from the sphere. "What is that?" "The sound of my world," Naru gritted out, his muscles screaming in protest. "And it's the last thing you'll ever hear." He charged. Ares, panicking, sent the storm of metal shards at him. Naru didn't dodge. He powered through them, the swirling chakra of the Rasengan disintegrating the metal on contact. He closed the distance in an instant. "Rasengan," he roared, slamming the sphere of spinning energy directly into Ares' chest. The impact was absolute. There was no explosion, only a silent, violent expansion of force. Ares' obsidian armor, which had seemed indestructible, simply disintegrated. The man's arrogant expression was frozen in a mask of pure terror as the churning energy tore through him, erasing him from existence. The force of the blow continued outward, striking the far wall of the command center and blasting a gaping, 20-foot hole clean through the mountain, revealing the night sky beyond. Naru collapsed to one knee, his right arm hanging limp and smoking, his body utterly spent. The Rasengan had taken everything he had left. Naru, Yor and Fiona rushed to his side, their faces a mixture of awe and terror at the display of power they had just witnessed. The intel, Naruto gasped, forcing himself to his feet. Fiona nodded, her expression grim as she gestured to the main console. We got it. It's worse than we thought. On the central screen was a world map. But it wasn't a political map. It was a network, a web, of glowing lines connecting dozens of major cities. Berlin, London, Paris, Washington, Moscow. They're not trying to start a war, Fiona said, her voice trembling slightly. They're trying to end the world as we know it. The screen zoomed in on a file labeled, Project Ascension. It was a manifesto, written by Prometheus himself. He believed humanity was stagnant, trapped in a cage of its own weak biology. His plan was to forcibly ascend the species. The network was a series of psycho-resonant amplifiers, hidden in the heart of those cities, built over years. When activated in unison, the Y would emit a psychic frequency that would forcibly awaken any latent metanormal abilities in the population on a global scale. He's going to turn the whole world into a war zone, Yor breathed, horrified. Billions of people, suddenly getting powers they can't control. Mass hysteria, global chaos, societal collapse. Lloyd's voice crackled over Fiona's comm. He'd been monitoring their data feed. And from the ashes, he will rise as the leader of a new, evolved, humanity. A world of superhumans, with him as their god. A timer appeared on the screen, counting down. 72 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. He's initiating the sequence, Fiona said. Her blood running cold. He knew we were coming. This was a trap. He sacrificed his top general and his main command center just to buy himself enough time to begin the endgame. Naruto, supported by Yor, stared at the map, at the glowing timer. He had won the battle, but in doing so, he may have just triggered the apocalypse. The weight of another world, another home to save or to lose, settled onto his shoulders. They stood in the ruins of the mountain fortress, staring at a 3-day countdown to the end of the world. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The day the world held its breath. The 72-hour countdown was a sword of Damocles hanging over the entire planet. The retreat from the Grolian peaks was a tense, silent affair. There was no victory, only the crushing weight of a new, unimaginable reality. Prometheus had outplayed them. He had sacrificed his queen to put their king in checkmate. While they had been focused on a single fortress, his true weapons, the ascension amplifiers, were already embedded in the heart of civilization, waiting for the signal. Their war room, once a dusty, forgotten apartment, was transformed. Lloyd, pulling every string he had, earned it into a clandestine global command center. Maps covered the walls, electronics scavenged from Y's black sites were wired together, and a constant stream of encrypted data flowed from Lloyd's network of panicked, but loyal assets across the globe. The Cold War was over. The Ascension War had begun. Lloyd, a man born for crisis, was in his element. He paced before the maps, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. The amplifiers are the key. They're psycho-resonant, which means they must be tied to a location with a high density of psychic traffic, emotion, thought, belief. Hospitals, transit hubs, broadcast towers, government centers. They'll be shielded, disguised as mundane infrastructure. He divided the world, assigning his most trusted international contacts, agents who owed him their lives, who understood the meaning of a world-ending threat, beyond national allegiance, to locate the devices in their respective cities. It was a desperate, frantic race against time, a shadow war fought by spies who didn't even know the full truth, only that they had to stop a coordinated, high-tech terrorist attack. That's the where, Fiona said, her voice sharp and focused. She had shed the last of her uncertainty. The mission was clear, the stakes absolute. What about the how? We can't just blow them up. The psychic backlash could be just as devastating as the activation. Disarmament requires a specialist, Lloyd confirmed, tapping a location in central Berlin. Each amplifier is a unique puzzle of engineering and esoteric science. We'll have to tackle them one by one. And the Berlin amplifier, the one that anchors the entire European network, will be the most heavily guarded. Their own roles crystallized in the crucible of the ticking clock. The fate of the world would hinge on 3 separate, simultaneous battles fought in their own city. Naruto stood by the window, watching the sun rise, a sliver of orange over the gray cityscape. His right arm was still bandaged, the muscles torn from the force of the Rasengan. His chakra was a shallow pond where an ocean had once been. He was drained, wounded, and facing a godlike enemy who was 10 steps ahead. As he looked at the reflection in the glass, at Yor standing just behind him, her expression a mask of fierce resolve, and Fiona, already studying schematics with an intensity that could burn through steel, he didn't feel despair. He felt the familiar, heavy weight of purpose. He was not alone. Prometheus's power is psychic, Naruto said, turning to face them. He'll be at the heart of his own network. The master control, the place where he'll personally oversee the ascension. That's where I need to be. He looked at the map of Berlin. The broadcast tower, the highest point in the city. A perfect antenna to cast his will across the world. The Berlin General Hospital is showing anomalous energy readings that match Chimera's signature, Fiona added, her finger tracing a different location. It's a hub of life, death, and powerful emotion. A perfect place to hide an amplifier. But it's also a civilian area. Demolitions are out of the question. And while you're busy, Lloyd finished, his face grim. Prometheus will need a distraction. Something to sow chaos and tie up the city's emergency services. He pointed to a series of reports detailing breakouts from high-security psyche. Atric facilities and disappearances from underground fight clubs. He's not just activating his network. He's releasing his failed experiments. His awakened, unstable, powerful psychics and berserkers let loose on the city. A wave of monsters to cover the birth of his new world. The battle lines were drawn. 3 fronts, 1 city. Fiona, with Lloyd as her eye in the sky, would lead a wise tactica. L team to infiltrate the hospital and disarm the European amplifier. Yor would become the city's shield, her mission to intercept the rampaging awakened, to protect the innocent caught in the crossfire. And Naruto would go to the Serpent's Head, to the broadcast tower, to face Prometheus himself in a final, desperate confrontation. There were no grand speeches, no tearful goodbyes. They simply shared a look. A silent acknowledgement of the trust, respect, and affection that had been forged between them in the heat of battle. A family of monsters, standing together against the end of the world. Naruto turned to Yor, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Be careful, he said. Yor met his gaze, and a small, confident smile touched her lips. He's the one who should be careful, she replied, her hand instinctively touching the golden stiletto hidden in her sleeve. Naruto then looked at Fiona. Don't get yourself killed, spy. My operational success rate is 98.7%, Fiona stated. Her voice its usual deadpan, but her eyes held a flicker of something more. I have no intention of altering that statistic. With a final, shared nod, they broke apart, Vani. Shing into the city as the clock ticked past the 48-hour mark. The day the world held its breath had begun. Fiona's front. The hospital. Fiona moved through the sterile corridors of Berlin General like a phantom. Dressed as a surgeon, with Lloyd's voice a calm, steady presence in her ear, she led a small, hand-picked team of Wise's most elite tactical agents. They were the best of the best, but they were walking into a war they couldn't comprehend. The amplifier is in the sub-basement, integrated into the hospital's primary power generator, Lloyd's voice instructed. But the entire floor is crawling with chimeras, janissaries, cybernetically enhanced guards with orders to kill anyone who gets near it. The fight, when it came, was swift and brutal. Fiona and her team were a whirlwind of silent takedowns and suppressed gunfire. But the janissaries were more than human, their bodies laced with armor, their reflexes inhumanly fast. 2 of Lloyd's agents went down, their bodies riddled with flechettes before they could react. Fiona's mind became a cold, tactical computer. She saw her team's conventional methods failing. She saw the cost of hesitation. She abandoned the Wise playbook and adopted Naruto's. Draw their fire. Form a defensive perimeter, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even herself. As her team laid down suppressing fire, Fiona broke from cover, a scalpel in a firefight. She didn't engage them head-on. She used her speed and agility, running along walls, dropping from ceiling pipes, her blades flashing. She wasn't aiming for kill shots. She was a surgeon, severing hydraulic lines in their limbs, slicing through optical sensors, crippling them with 1,000 precise cuts. She was a ghost, an untouchable blur of motion, her calm bat-style a fusion of Wise's precision and the fluid, overwhelming battlefield control she had learned from watching Naruto. She reached the generator room alone, her team holding the line behind her. He amplifier was a grotesque fusion of technology and biology, a crystalline heart pulsing with a sickening purple light, woven into the hospital's power grid. Wires like veins covered its surface, and a low, psychic hum vibrated the very air. Fiona, you have to disconnect the primary conduits in a specific sequence. Lloyd's voice was tense. Get it wrong, and it'll detonate with the force of a tactical nuke. He began calling out the sequence. Fiona, her hands steady, began to work, her fingers flying across the control panels. But as she disconnected the second conduit, a failsafe triggered. Armored plates slammed down, covering the final access panel, and a new timer appeared on a nearby screen. 5 minutes. It's a trap, she yelled into her comm. I'm locked out. There has to be an override. Fiona's eyes scanned the room, her mind racing. The power cables, the coolant pipes, the entire system. It was all a puzzle. And then she saw it. Not an electronic override, but a physical one. A series of manual release valves for the coolant system. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble based on a half-remembered engineering schematic. Lloyd, I'm going to try to flood the core, she said. Her voice calm despite her pounding heart. If I can cause a thermal shock, it might force a system reboot and retract the blast shields. The risk of a catastrophic meltdown is over 90%. Lloyd protested. It's better than 100%. Fiona shot back. She didn't wait for a reply. She threw her entire body against the massive release levers, her muscles straining. With a groaning screech of metal, the valves opened. Super-cooled liquid nitrogen flooded the chamber, the room instantly filling with a thick white fog. The amplifier shrieked, a high-pitched psychic scream as its temperature plummeted. Alarms blared. For a terrifying moment, Fiona thought she had made a fatal mistake. Then, with a hiss of pneumatics, the blast shield retracted. She had 1 minute left. Shivering in the freezing fog, her fingers numb, Fiona flew at the final console, her movements a blur as she disconnected the last conduits in Lloyd's frantic, shouted sequence. With 3 seconds to spare, the purple light in the crystalline heart flickered and died. The amplifier was inert. Europe was safe. Fiona Frost sank to her knees, shaking and exhausted, but victorious. Yor's front. The city. While Fiona fought in the depths of the hospital, Yor fought in the streets. The awakened that Prometheus had unleashed were a tide of chaos. A man who could peel asphalt from the road with his mind. A woman whose shrieks could shatter glass a block away, a hulking brute whose skin was like stone. They weren't soldiers. They were frightened, confused people, their newfound powers turning them into rampaging monsters. The police and SSS were useless, their bullets and tactics ineffective. The city was descending into panic. But the city had a guardian angel. A whirlwind in a black dress. Yor became a force of nature. But this was a different kind of fight. Her mission was not to kill. It was to protect. On the crowded Alexanderplatz, as the telekinetic began hurling cars, Yor didn't attack him. She moved through the crowd, a blur of motion, pushing people out of the way, intercepting a flying taxi with a single, staggering punch that crumpled it like a tin can, shielding a group of children with her own body. She saw the fear in the awakened's eyes. The pain, the confusion. She saw herself in them. A person with a terrible power they didn't ask for. And her objective shifted. It wasn't just about incapacitating them. It was about saving them, too. She confronted the stone-skinned brute as he tore through a market square. He was a mountain of muscle and rage. She met his charge, not with a killing blow, but with a perfectly timed throw that used his own momentum to send him crashing into the fountain, away from the crowds. She moved with a grace and power that was breathtaking. Her every action calculated to neutralize the threat while minimizing harm. She was the Thorn Princess, her lethal skills repurposed into a dance of salvation. Her battle became a legend whispered in the panicked crowds, a dark angel, moving faster than sight, saving lives, stopping monsters. She wasn't the garden's assassin. She wasn't Mrs. Forger, the clumsy clerk. She was Yor, a protector, fighting for the innocent. For the city she had come to call home. She was finally, truly, fighting for herself. Naru's front. The tower. The Berlin broadcast tower stretched into the stormy sky like a needle aimed at the heart of the heavens. Naru stood at its base, the wind whipping at his coat. He could feel Prometheus at the pinnacle, a malignant star of psychic energy, drawing the threads of his global network together. The tower was guarded, legions of Chimera's finest soldiers and automated defenses. Naru didn't sneak in, he walked through the front door. The battle for the tower was a vertical ascent into hell. Naru fought with a cold, desperate efficiency. He had no chakra left for clones or grand techniques. He fought with his fists, his feet, and the sheer, indomitable will of his Uzumaki life force. His body screamed in protest, his muscles tearing, his wounds reopening. But he did not stop. He moved through the levels like a rising storm, leaving a trail of machines and unconscious soldiers in his wake. He was no longer just a man. He was an idea, a promise, the embodiment of a single, unwavering purpose, to protect his new home. He finally reached the top floor, a circular observation deck with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's eye view of the storm-lashed city. In the center of the room, floating a few inches off the ground in a vortex of crackling psychic energy, was Prometheus. The Ascension network was channeled through him, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, cosmic light. "You were persistent, traveler," Prometheus's voice echoed in Naru's mind. A chorus of 1,000 voices. "But you are too late. The overture is finished. The symphony of creation is about to begin." "I've heard that one before," Naru gasped, leaning against the doorframe. His body bruised and broken. Prometheus laughed, a sound that shook the very glass of the tower. He gestured to the city below. "Look at them. They scurry and panic, insects in a jar. I will give them purpose. I will give them fire. I will make them gods." The psychic pressure in the room became immense. The windows began to crack. Visions flooded Naru's mind, assaults on his soul. He saw Konoha in ruins. The faces of his fallen friends contorted in accusation. He saw Sasuke, bleeding and dying, blaming him. He saw the empty ramen stand, his dream of peace turned to ash. "You were a failure, Naruto Uzumaki." Prometheus boomed, his psychic attack relentless. "You failed your world. You failed your friends. And you will fail this world, too. You protect nothing. You only delay the inevitable." Naru stumbled, his knees buckling under the psychic onslaught. The pain, the guilt, the loss, it was all consuming. He was drowning in his own past. But then, through the storm of psychic torture, other images appeared. Anya, proudly handing him a crayon drawing. Yor, smiling at him over a bowl of ramen, her eyes filled with a quiet, trusting warmth. Fiona, her icy composure melting into a look of grudging respect. Lloyd, betting the world on him. A new family, a new home, not a replacement for the one he had lost, but something new. Something precious, something worth fighting for. He pushed himself back to his feet, his blue eyes clearing, the psychic mirages shattering against the force of his will. "My name is Naru," he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. "And you're right, I couldn't save my world. I couldn't save everyone." He took a step forward, his body screaming, but his spirit soaring. "But I learned something from all that loss, Prometheus. A home isn't a place. It's the people you'd burn the world down to protect." He held up his left hand, and with a final, primal roar that came from the very core of his soul, he began to gather the last dregs of his life force. Not the dregs of his chakra. His own energy. The raw, untamed power of a demigod's son and a Jinchuriki's legacy. A tiny, brilliant speck of golden light appeared in his palm, a miniature sun. Prometheus stared, his arrogance finally giving way to disbelief. "What is this? Your chakra is gone." "This isn't chakra," Naru said, the golden light expanding, taking on the familiar, swirling shape of his father's ultimate technique. "This is a promise," he charged. Prometheus, seeing the raw, world-breaking power in that golden sphere, abandoned his psychic attacks and unleashed his full telekinetic might. The tower tore itself apart. Chunks of concrete and steel flew at Naru. He didn't dodge. He powered through, the golden Rasengan vaporizing everything in its path. He reached Prometheus. The two travelers, two souls from dead worlds, collided. Rasengan. The golden light consumed them both. It did not explode. It imploded, a silent, ravenous sphere of annihilation that tore a hole in reality itself. It shattered the Ascension Network. It shattered Prometheus's psychic form. It shattered the storm clouds, and for the first time that day, a single ray of sunlight broke through, illuminating the ruined tower. Aftermath. The ramen stand. The world held its breath, and then, it breathed a sigh of relief. The official story was that a coordinated, multinational terror East attack using experimental sonic weaponry had been thwarted by the timely intervention of global intelligence agencies. The truth was known only to a handful of people. Weeks later, life in Berlin had returned to a fragile normalcy. Naruto's Ichiraku was open for business. The stand was crowded, the air filled with the familiar, comforting scent of pork broth and roasted garlic. Naru, his arm, now free of its bandage but still bearing a faint, new scar, moved with his usual placid grace, though a new lightness was in his step. Yor sat at the counter, her hair tied back, happily slurping her noodles. There was a new confidence in her posture, a quiet self-assurance that hadn't been there before. She had submitted her resignation to the garden, citing a desire to focus on her family. They had, surprisingly, accepted. The legend of the Dark Angel of Berlin had made her too public, too valuable as a symbol of hope to be kept in the shadows. Fiona stood near the entrance, her arms crossed, her expression as stern as ever. But she wasn't on a mission. She was waiting for her takeout order. She had been, officially reprimanded, for her actions, a black mark on her permanent record that she wore like a badge of honor. Her relationship with Lloyd was different now, less about seeking approval, and more a partnership of mutual, hard-won respect. Lloyd himself sat at the far end of the counter, with Anya perched on the stool beside him. Anya was meticulously drawing on a napkin. Lloyd watched the scene, his fake wife, his rogue colleague, and the man who had saved the world, all gathered in this tiny, humble ramen stand. Operation Strix seemed like a lifetime ago. He had wanted to build a world where children didn't have to cry. He was beginning to think that world started here, with a bowl of noodles. Anya finished her drawing and slid off her stool, holding it up for Naru to see. It was a picture of 5 people. A smiling blonde man with whiskers. A beautiful woman with black hair holding a golden needle. A stern-faced woman with white hair holding a gun. A man in a green suit with a serious expression. And in the middle of them all, a little girl with pink hair, holding all of their hands. Above the drawing, in her messy, childish script, she had written one word. Family. Naru took the drawing, his lips curving into a genuine, heartfelt smile. He looked at Yor, at Fiona, at Lloyd and Anya. He looked at his little ramen stand, a beacon of warmth and light in the heart of the city. The peace was fragile. The future was uncertain. The world now knew that monsters were real. But for the first time since he had woken up in this strange, new reality, Naruto Uzumaki was truly, finally, home. Chapter 7 End.